Chapter 1057. With a pained expression, Yang Fu threw the cricket that was stomped to death by the maidservant aside and said proudly, "Luckily I caught a state guarding general that was even more powerful than the mighty general yesterday." Yang Liuqing looked at him, clenching and unclenching his fists. His eyes were filled with disappointment. Elder Wang sighed and looked up at the sky. Yang Liuqing took a deep breath and looked at Li Yi apologetically. She said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Uncle Master. It's fine now. We're family. There's no need to apologize." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to leave. "Yang Fu." Yang Liuqing walked up to the young man who was playing with the cricket. Yang Fu looked up at her. Yang Liuqing looked at him and asked, "Have you finished today's math problems?" Yang Fu immediately nodded and said, "I finished today's 2 problems." "Very good." Yang Liuqing patted his head and said, "My royal sister will reward you with 10 more problems. Go and solve them. You can eat after you're done." Hearing this, Yang Fu's body trembled. He raised his head and looked at his royal sister who spoiled him the most. He suddenly felt that at this moment she was so unfamiliar. Unfamiliar yet familiar at the same time. His face was pale and his body was trembling. "Oh no, my royal sister must have been possessed. She must have been possessed by that bastard," he cried, heartbroken and heartbroken. "I don't want to write. I want to go back. I don't want to stay in this place anymore." After moving back to Shuzhou from the fringe, Li Yi had not seen the young man named Yang Fu. According to Wei Liang, His Highness King Jing had been in seclusion for the past 2 months, painstakingly studying mathematics. He must have made great progress. Otherwise, he wouldn't have cried tears of joy in the middle of the night. His cries could be heard from a courtyard away. For the first time, Li Yi admired Yang Fu. When Li Duan first started studying mathematics, he cried a lot. When he encountered a difficult problem, he could not solve it even after a long time. He cried even sadder than Li Duan when he was only a few months old. Yang Fu could actually cry tears of joy. He was simply the chosen one. Yang Liuqing's injuries were almost healed. She didn't mention anything about revenge anymore. She stayed by Mississippi Lu's side every day to help her deal with Lu Meng's matters. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, no different from a few years ago. Li Yi would occasionally see her sitting in the courtyard in a daze. Her eyes were blank, unfocused, and without direction. She was like a lost child, unable to find the way forward or the way back. Of course, when she was in front of others, she would put away all these emotions. No one knew how heavy her heart was. Wu Kingdom's spies came back with some more news. Li Yi personally brought it to her. In fact, there wasn't any valuable news. Wu Kingdom was still as chaotic as before. The warlords were divided and engaged in a tug-of-war with the imperial court. If there were no accidents, this situation would continue for a long time. But no news was good news for her. The border armies that were loyal to her had been scattered a few months ago. If they were captured by the imperial court, in order to serve as a deterrent, they would definitely spread the news with great fanfare. If there was no news, at least it meant that they were living in harmony. After reading the news, Yang Liuqing's mood rose slightly. She bowed and said, "Thank you, Marshal Uncle." Li Yi waved his hand. "You're welcome." Yang Fu walked out of the room and asked in a low voice, "Imperial sister, I finished my homework for today. Can I go out and play?" Yang Liuqing nodded. "Go ahead." Seeing Yang Fu run out, she looked at Li Yi. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything. Li Yi looked at her and said in surprise, "Do you have something to say to me?" Yang Liuqing pondered for a long time. Then she looked at Li Yi and said with some begging, Can I hand Yang Fu over to Marshal Uncle to discipline for a period of time?" Li Yi could understand how she felt when she said this. Yang Fu was her and these people's only hope. With Yang Fu around, they would have enough reason to resist the imperial court of Wu Kingdom. Only then would they have a reason to pull down the emperor of Wu Kingdom from the throne and help Yang Fu onto it. But this couldn't be their one-sided wish. If they could succeed in the end, Yang Fu would definitely sit on the throne. But the reality was that this emperor was somewhat unworthy of being helped up. When he was born, there was no red light, no colorful glow, no auspicious clouds, no beautiful stars, no auspicious clouds, no emperor's aura, no black dragon coming out of the water, no phoenix crying over the mountain, no white rainbow piercing the sun, and no sweet dew falling on the ground. His mother didn't carry him for 3 years, so he couldn't speak at birth. His appearance was also normal. He didn't have double pupils for breasts, long hands, a square face, and the lines on his hands and feet couldn't be written. There was no Yang Fu will be the emperor in the future written on it. He was just King Jing, a very ordinary prince. From birth until now, he didn't have the appearance of an emperor at all. nor did he have the fate of an overlord. But he had a very good temper. Even if this kind of person became the emperor in the future and wanted to brag about how awesome and extraordinary he was before he became the emperor, he couldn't find any material. So Old Man Wang sighed all day, and Yang Liuqing was also unhappy. As martial uncle, Li Yi felt sorry for her. "It's not that I can't discipline him." Li Yi nodded and said, "It's just that my method might be a little different." "I'm worried, martial uncle, you agree?" Yang Liuqing grabbed his arm and said in surprise. Looking at her hand that was grabbing his arm, Li Yi blushed. He looked around and said, "Don't be like this. It's not good if your master sees it." "I'm sorry, martial uncle, I'm too happy." Yang Liuqing hurriedly let go of him and said, "As long as you agree to discipline Yang Fu, I'll agree to any condition, and I definitely won't interfere with you." Li Yi secretly sighed and felt a little sad for Yang Fu. How could there be such a sister in the world? Wasn't she pushing her brother into the fire pit? Wasn't she not giving Yang Fu a way out? Were the two of them really siblings? Yang Fu was different from other children. He was a member of the royal family of the Wu Kingdom, a noble prince. Other children gathered in groups of 3 to 5, playing with spinning tops, playing with glass beads, fanning pictures, shooting birds with slingshots, and competing to see who could pee further. Yang Fu always played by himself. There were 2 reasons why he played by himself. First, he was self-conscious of his status and was unwilling to be friends with these lowly commoners in his eyes, nor was he willing to play with them. Second, he had offended Fat Tiger on the first day he came here. Fat Tiger was the king of the children here. If he offended the king, the children would be kind enough not to beat him up. No one was willing to play with him. Therefore, the 14-year-old Yang Fu could only play with mud by himself. Li Yi couldn't bear to tell him that the place he played with mud was where Fat Tiger and the others competed to see who could pee further. Who hadn't played with mud when they were young? Yang Liuqing walked out of the courtyard and said to Yang Fu, "Yang Fu, come here." Yang Fu raised his head to take a look. His royal sister seemed to be very happy. It had been a long time since she had been this happy. If his royal sister was happy, he should also be happy in his heart, but why did he feel a chill in his heart, and the surroundings were a little cold? He stood up and slowly walked over, obediently calling out, "Royal sister." Then, he quietly moved away from the person beside his royal sister. "I have something to tell you." Yang Liuqing glanced at Li Yi, who was beside her, before looking at him and saying, "From now on, you must listen to Uncle Master's words. Whatever Uncle Master asks you to do, you must do it. You must listen to Uncle Master's words just like how you listen to me." Yang Fu's body trembled and his face turned pale. He knew who his royal sister's Uncle Master was. It was the person he feared the most, second only to his second brother. He shook his head fiercely, his attitude firm. I don't want to listen to him, I don't want to listen to him." "Yang Fu," Yang Liuqing said in a deep voice. Yang Fu shivered, and his voice came to an abrupt stop. His royal sister was his only family in this world, so he had to listen to her. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, "Call me Mr." Yang Fu looked up at Li Yi with a stubborn expression. He opened his mouth but nothing came out. Li Yi waved his hand and said with a smile, "There's no need to call me Mr." He was willing to help Yang Liuqing discipline Yang Fu because he didn't want to refuse her, and he didn't want to make her sad. He also didn't want to teach Yang Fu knowledge, but he wanted him to change some of the bad habits he had developed for a long time, so that he could become a person that most people didn't dislike. Every time he heard the word Mr., the only thing that would appear in his mind would be the girl's tearful smile before they parted, and the figure standing on the palace wall. So, after leaving the capital, he wouldn't accept any more disciples and he wouldn't let anyone call him Mr. Yang Fu wasn't, and no one else would be. Chapter 1058. If Uncle did not want Yang Fu to call him Mr., it meant that he would not accept him as a disciple. Yang Liuqing was a little disappointed, but she knew that Yang Fu was still far from being qualified to be Uncle's disciple. She looked at Yang Fu and said seriously, "You have to listen to Uncle's words just like you listen to me. If I find out that you have disobeyed Uncle's orders, I will not have you as my brother anymore." Yang Fu shivered and said hurriedly, "Sister, I understand. I will be obedient." Yang Liuqing looked at him. A trace of pity flashed in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. She knew that her words were a little harsh, but this was the only chance to change him. She looked at Li Yi and said gratefully, "Uncle, I will hand Yang Fu over to you." Li Yi nodded and said, "He is still a child. It is normal for him to be a little naughty. As long as you guide him patiently, he will be able to correct his shortcomings." He said guide, but Yang Fu's heart did not relax. He said that he would reward him, but in the end he gave him a very difficult book, elementary mathematics. Did he mean to guide him by beating him up? Yang Liuqing bowed and said, "Thank you, uncle." Li actually did not have much experience in teaching naughty children. He felt that it was more straightforward to beat the child. However, of course he could not beat Yang Fu. That would be bullying the young and he would never do such a thing. Mississippi Lu walked into the study and looked at Yang Fu who was sitting at the desk. She then looked at Li Yi and asked, "Did you accept him as your disciple?" "No." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I only promised your disciple to help her discipline her brother for a few days." "You even know how to discipline people?" Mississippi Lu looked doubtful. He could not even discipline himself, how would he know how to discipline others? "What's so difficult about it?" Li Yi looked at her and said, "If a child is disobedient, just beat him up. What's there to discipline?" Yang Fu, who had just written down an equation, shook his hand, and a blob of ink immediately appeared on the paper. His hand that was holding the pen trembled slightly. He had clearly promised his royal sister that he would guide her. How could he hit him? He was still a child. How could he not keep his word? "Hurry up and write. You can only eat after you finish." Li Yi looked at Yang Fu and reminded him before walking out of the study. There was no point in trying to reason with him. He would not listen, nor would he be willing to listen. Therefore he would assign tasks to Yang Fu every day. It might be homework, it might be for him to help out at a certain shop, or it might be for him to make friends with Fat Tiger and win 10 glass beads from Fat Tiger. He couldn't eat if he didn't complete the task. In order not to starve, he had to do things he didn't want to do. For a child of Yang Fu's background, it was not strange for him to develop a proud and aloof personality. In the royal family of the Jing Kingdom, there were many princes who were arrogant. Although Li Han used to be naughty, his nature was not bad. He could be considered as a clean stream. For a muddy water like Yang Fu, it had to go through layers of filtering to make him forget his identity as a prince and adapt to being an ordinary person. Which was more important, eating or identity? He definitely had a clear idea. Mississippi Lu hugged her sword and leaned against the pillar. Li Yi stood at the door and looked at her. Li Yi watched for a while and asked, "Thinking about your disciple?" Mississippi Lu did not deny it. She said, "How difficult is it to do what they want to do?" "Almost impossible." In front of Rui, Li Yi did not need to hide. He said, "Even if you are willing to help her, it is almost impossible. Moreover, it will take a lot of time and many people will die. Many innocent and irrelevant people will die. Even so, the chance of success is still very small. If rebellion was so easy to succeed, wouldn't the change of dynasties be as frequent as the change of lovers between scumbags? The history of the Wu Kingdom was longer than that of the Jing Kingdom. It had occupied that land for more than 100 years. How could the regime be so easily overthrown? Li Yi looked at her and said, "The price of rebellion is too high, and the success rate is too low. If you can persuade her to give up on this idea, it will be the best." The emperor of Wu country had a blood feud with Yang Liuqing. As a martial uncle who was not related to her, it was not appropriate for him to advise her to give up on revenge. Second, young Mistress Lu was her teacher, her biological teacher. Only she had the right to say this. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "If they go back now and start planning again, what are the chances of success?" "Not even 5%. What if we lend them divine punishment and weapons?" "Divine punishment is not omnipotent. No matter how sharp the weapons are, they can't be used if they are not strong enough. Just 5%. What if we have Lu Meng's help? On the battlefield, the strength of an individual will be infinitely weakened. 10%, no more than 10%. Even if we are lucky to succeed, Lu Meng won't have many people left." Mississippi Lu thought for a while and continued to ask, "What if I am her?" Li Yi was stunned. He looked at her and asked, "You mean you are Yang Liuqing, the emperor of the Wu Kingdom who killed our father and forced our mother to death?" Mississippi Lu nodded. Li Yi thought for a moment and a smile appeared on his face. "Hee, I finished writing?" Yang Fu walked out of the study with a notebook. As soon as he opened his mouth, he saw the smile on Li Yi's face. He couldn't help but shiver and his hair stood on end. He forcibly swallowed the words he wanted to say. He quickly turned around and ran back to his seat. His body was trembling and his palms were sweaty. Mississippi Lu was basically asking how likely it was if he wanted to rebel. He had once helped the king of Shu rebel. The one-eyed stone man, the fish belly silk book, the fox spirit, the nursery rhymes. These were all Rebellion 1.0. Now it had been upgraded to Rainbow in Broad Daylight, the version 2.0 that came with the rainbow glow. As someone who was familiar with all kinds of revolutionary routines and was familiar with tunnel warfare, landmine warfare, guerrilla warfare, and on protracted war, he understood the united front, armed struggle, and knew that the country was surrounded by the city. He rolled up his sleeves and worked hard. At most, in 5 years at most, the Wu kingdom would change its surname to Li or Lu. Of course, if he only wanted to take revenge, no matter who the emperor was, he just needed to ask second granduncle to take the head of the emperor. Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and asked, "If you want to rebel, how many people will be left in the Lu Meng?" Li looked at her and said in surprise, "If I want to rebel, then I want to rebel. What does it have to do with the Lu Meng?" At this point there was no need to continue. Mississippi Lu had already gotten the answer she wanted. Li didn't want to lie to Rui. If he really wanted to rebel against the Wu kingdom wholeheartedly, even if he wasn't 100% sure, he had at least an 80% chance of success. The Wu kingdom was not like the Jing kingdom, which was as solid as an iron bucket. In fact, it was not even comparable to the current Qi kingdom. The Wu kingdom itself was on the verge of falling apart. Warlords rose up and the common people were displaced. The Wu kingdom was in dire straits and oppression was everywhere. From a historical point of view, it was very likely that a great man who could change the dynasty would emerge at this time. Li really didn't have much confidence that he could rebel in the Jing kingdom. But the Wu kingdom, he could write a letter to Li Xian and ask him to provide international assistance. Li Xian never thought it was a big deal. He could also shine the glory of the empress to the Wu kingdom and save the people of the Wu kingdom. He could also conquer the warlords of the Wu kingdom one by one, just like he conquered the chaotic land. If they didn't obey him, he could use divine punishment and cannon to crush them. He really didn't need the Lu Meng. But he didn't have any reason to do so. Was it just to help Yang Liuqing take revenge? If it was just revenge, Li could even ask second granduncle to take the head of the emperor of the Wu kingdom at the price of several chickens. However, they wanted to rebel and push Yang Fu onto the throne. Then what? Li felt that the emperor of the Wu kingdom might not be very grateful to him. For example, now for no reason the emperor had an inexplicable hostility towards him. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, but he wouldn't use Rui, Li Duan, and Ruoqing Zimo as the wager for his martial nephew. He believed in Yang Liuqing, but he didn't believe in Yang Fu. Mississippi Lu's assumption didn't work, so all the questions she asked based on this had no answer. Chapter 1059. In just half a month, Yang Fu had changed a lot. Every day he would take the initiative to complete his homework. When he saw trash on the ground, he would bend over to pick it up and place it in the trash can. When it rained, he would help the people living on the street to collect the clothes that had not been collected in time. Helping the elderly cross the road was a common occurrence for him. In fact, Li did not have strict requirements for him. Compared with Li Han, Yang Fu's life was simply too happy. He only needed to complete the homework that old Wang gave him, and then do 10 good deeds every day. He needed to do 10 good deeds every day to ensure that he would have food to eat the next day. If he did 10 good deeds, he would eat vegetables and rice. If he did not do 10 good deeds, he could only choose to eat soil or tree bark. Only by exceeding the minimum standards set by Li could he have the right to eat meat. Of course, he also had other choices. Eating tree bark in the village was an act of vandalism. Once he was caught by the law enforcement team, he would be grounded. Being grounded would give him steamed buns, which was better than eating tree bark and soil. However, Yang Fu had not thought of this yet. Habit was a terrible thing. Whether he was willing or not, even if he pretended to do all these good deeds, as long as he could keep pretending, he would be worthy of the title of Top 10 Young Men of Willow Village. The name of the village, Li, followed the name of Willow Village in Qingyan Prefecture. It was also in the mountains and they also had the blood of bandits. It would more or less make Rui and the others feel a little bit like home. Yang Fu was the new Top 10 Young Men of Willow Village. It was not easy to get this title. The children in the village were all full of energy, or maybe their parents were full of energy. To get this title, Yang Fu had to exceed or double the task that Li Yi gave him. Whether he did it for King Jing's face or to not starve, at least on the surface, he was not as naughty as before. Yang Fu did not know when his sense of superiority disappeared. He could play glass beads with Fat Tiger and the others, fan pictures, and compete on the mountain to see who could pee further. Of course, he was usually the one who lost, especially in the last round. After the competition, he looked very sad, as if his self-esteem had suffered a great blow. Yang Liuqing and Prime Minister Wang noticed Yang Fu's change. Elder Wang looked at Yang Fu, who was picking up the trash on the ground and throwing it into the trash can. He sighed and said, "I've been teaching for my entire life and nurturing people for my entire life, but I'm still not as thorough as a young man. Yang Liuqing comforted him. Even the Wengu from the Qi kingdom, who is well versed in Confucian classics and has students all over the world, has lost to Uncle Master. Prime Minister, you don't have to worry too much. Her Royal Highness's way of comforting people was very unique. The old man surnamed Wang was stunned for a long time before he sighed and said, Jiang of Silla knows everything and knows everything. It's a pity? Yang Liuqing looked at him and asked doubtfully, what's a pity? Nothing much. As Yang Liuqing walked towards Yang Fu, the old man looked in that direction and murmured, it's a pity that he isn't willing to help King Jing. Li Yi had long passed the stage of being a good teacher. In other words, he had never been a good teacher. What would happen if he taught an emperor? Would an emperor come looking for trouble with him? Not all emperors in this world were as stupid as Li Xian. Not all of them were so free that they would abandon their own families to help others rebel. When he first came here, he could be fearless when he didn't even have enough to eat. But now he couldn't. Li Duan was only 3 years old now. The child in Zue Mo's belly hadn't been born yet. He and Ruoqing didn't have a child yet. The longer he stayed here, the more he was afraid of death. He would first consider the risk before doing anything. He wouldn't do anything that was difficult and dangerous without any benefits. Although Rui didn't say it explicitly, they had been in cahoots for so long. They would always think of these things together. What was the point of rebelling? It was better to hug Yongning and listen to her talk about her childhood than to rebel. Yongning had told these things many times and he had also heard them many times. Yongning never got tired of talking and he never got tired of listening. 2 days ago it rained and thundered at night. Yongning ran to him in Rui's room barefoot. Rui hugged her and coaxed her for a long time before she fell asleep. A few days before the weather cleared, she slept with Rui. She looked up at Li Yi and murmured, Brother, I miss Royal Sister. In the past, when there was thunder, it was Royal Sister who hugged me to sleep. Li Yi couldn't continue her words. He patted her head and said, In the future if you're afraid at night, go find Sister Rui or Sister Xiao Huan to sleep with you. Yongning nodded and looked at Li Yi. But I still miss Royal Sister Shaning. Li Yi suddenly felt something cold at the tip of his nose. He looked up and saw snowflakes falling from the gray sky. It's snowing. Yongning jumped out of his arms with a happy expression on her face. She stretched out her arms and spun around in the courtyard. Shu province didn't have snow every year. Although it wasn't rare, almost everyone looked forward to the first snow every winter. This was also the cleanest snow of the entire winter. In her previous life, Yongning was born in a province in the south, and it was only after she arrived here that she had seen snow. Although snow was no longer that rare to her, she was still very excited every time it snowed. This snowfall was very heavy and fast. The ground was soon covered with a thin layer of snow. However, if she wanted to build a snowman and have a snowball fight, she would have to wait until tomorrow at the very least. After this snowfall, the new year was approaching. Time was about to enter the second year of Jingping, the capital. On the 23rd of the 12th month, when Li Xian walked out of his room, he discovered that a heavy snow had silently fallen last night. Hibiscus Garden's hair had turned white overnight. Soon it would be another year's court conference. However, as the emperor he wasn't that busy. It was good to have Emingzu in court. If he had to handle all these things alone he would definitely be flustered. He wouldn't be able to attend to the matters of the Academy of Sciences. However, it was impossible for Emingzu to help him forever. Ever since she started to limit the number of memorials submitted by the various departments of the court and gradually reduced it. Now it had become one every 3 days unless it was an emergency. At that time he knew that she would have to leave sooner or later. He couldn't blame Emingzu. In fact, he felt that he was a little selfish. If it wasn't for the restraints of the court, she might still be having fun with Li Yi. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that he had really let her down. In the morning, a thick layer of snow had fallen in Hibiscus Garden. There were guards patrolling the palace from morning till night. The ground had been trampled out of shape. It was a little disappointing. He walked through the long corridor alone and headed in the direction of the Imperial Garden. There were many Imperial Gardens in the capital. Besides the Imperial Palace, there were also Hibiscus Garden and Xiujiang Garden. Comparatively speaking, Hibiscus Garden's garden was the largest and the most beautiful. Everyone in the capital knew that the plum blossoms and Cold Mountain Temple were unique. Every year, countless people would go to see them. However, only a few people knew that the plum forest in Hibiscus Garden was not inferior to the plum blossoms in Cold Mountain Temple. It was just that other than a few members of the imperial family, no one else could enjoy the scenery in the garden. Leaving the first set of footprints in the snow-covered, spotless garden was something that gave him a sense of accomplishment. Li Xian walked to the entrance of the garden. When he saw that there was already a line of footprints extending into the garden, he immediately felt depressed. He walked into the plum forest and followed the footprints. When he saw the figure standing under the largest plum tree in the garden, the depression in his heart was swept away. He slowly walked over and softly asked, "Why did you wake up so early?" The girl was wearing a white robe. When she heard the voice, she turned her head and smiled. She said, "I woke up early. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and took a walk." Li Xian looked up and saw a red ribbon tied to a plum tree branch. Shanning would come here every day to tie a red ribbon. Now there were hundreds of red ribbons. From afar, the ribbons on the plum tree danced in the wind, adding some embellishment to the white world. It was the most unique scenery in this plum forest. He looked at the girl's elegant smile and thought to himself, "What a heartless fellow. He actually made me wait for so long in the capital and didn't even know to come back." He only had a vague idea of what he had done to Shuzhou. He also heard that he had conquered the entire land of chaos. Such an interesting thing, but he couldn't participate in it personally. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, "After the imperial court meeting, your sister and I plan to go to Shuzhou. We are going to patrol incognito. Does Shanning want to go with us?" The girl was startled. She suddenly raised her head and her face blushed. Her voice trembled as she said, Shuzhou." Li Xian nodded. I have to go back and ask mother." The girl's face instantly turned red and she quickly ran out of the garden. She ran in such a hurry that she didn't pay attention to her feet and accidentally tripped. Li Xian hurriedly went forward to help her up. However, the girl had already gotten up on her own. She didn't even have time to brush off the snow on her body. She staggered and jogged outside. When her figure completely disappeared, Li Xian sighed and said leisurely, "It's time to do an incognito visit." Chapter 1060. Hibiscus Garden was the largest royal garden in the capital aside from the imperial palace. Ever since His Majesty ascended to the throne, he had spent more time in Hibiscus Garden than in the imperial palace. The eldest princess, who had been promoted from assistant to head the government, also lived in Hibiscus Garden. Apart from the morning court session that was held every 7 days in the legislative hall, for the past 2 years, most of the memorials submitted by the various departments of the court were also sent to Hibiscus Garden. After the renovation of Hibiscus Garden, a few new palaces were built and the palace complex was expanded. His Majesty the Empress and Imperial Consort, the Empress Dowager, the eldest princess, and Princess Shanning all lived there. In the past 2 years, Hibiscus Garden seemed to be replacing the Imperial Palace. The officials were now used to not clashing with His Majesty on such matters. His Majesty lived wherever he liked. Even when His Majesty brought the Empress Dowager and Imperial Consort Yen over, no censor said anything, and no official from the Ministry of Rights said it was inappropriate. Ever since the matter of the Jiang of Silla came to an end, Prime Minister Qin retired, and Prime Minister Shin retired from the court. All the big shots in the court were promoted by His Majesty and eldest princess. The relationship between the emperor and his officials was particularly harmonious. Hibiscus Garden, Shaoling Palace. Shaoling Palace was the residence of Imperial Consort Yen. The Imperial Consort Yen mentioned here was not the current emperor's consort. The current emperor only had 2 consorts, the Empress and Imperial Consort Yen. Imperial Consort Yen was the former emperor's consort and the only one other than the empress who did not have to live in a fixed residence in the imperial palace. By the window of the small pavilion, heavy snow was falling outside. The fire in the room was burning brightly without a trace of cold air. Imperial Consort Yen leaned against the window, holding a scroll in her hand. At some point, she looked down and saw a girl stumbling over from afar. A palace maid walked over slowly and said softly, "Imperial Consort, the princess is back." "I saw her." Imperial Consort Yen nodded. The girl had already gone upstairs. The palace maid hurriedly took the snow-stained robe. The girl took off her shoes, jumped onto the bed and burrowed under the covers. She rubbed her little hands vigorously, and her delicate little face was red from the cold. Concubine Yen put down the scroll and held her 2 small hands in her hands. She asked, "It's snowing heavily. What are you doing out so early in the morning? Did you fall just now?" Her hand was held by her mother. She said with a smile, "The plum blossoms in Furong Garden are in full bloom. They're even more beautiful than those in Cold Mountain Temple. I'll accompany you to take a look in the afternoon." Yen Fei touched her hair and said, "Tell me what's the matter. Why did you come back in such a hurry?" The girl lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Brother and sister are going to Shuzhou. They are going to patrol in disguise. Go if you want to." Concubine Yen patted her head and said with a smile. But, no buts. Concubine Yen shook her head and said, the capital is so small. I have to go out and see more scenery and meet the people I want to meet. Then I'll make arrangements for the academy and the association first. The girl hurriedly lifted the blanket and jumped off the bed. She put on her shoes and quickly disappeared into the small building. Concubine Yen leaned against the window and watched as the figure hurriedly ran into the snow and quickly disappeared. She picked up the scroll again and thought for a moment. Then she picked up the brush and added a few words at the back before putting the scroll down. She opened the window, and the wind blew in from outside, blowing the scroll she had placed in front of the window. The cover of the book was blown open, revealing a few small and graceful words. Mandarin duck handkerchief. The cold wind swept in a few snowflakes. She stretched out a hand and a snowflake landed on her palm. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she slowly clenched her fist. The snowflakes melted, but she seemed to be clenching something tightly. In the Jiang of Silla residence, Li Yi tightened his clothes. It was already past the new year, but the weather was getting colder and colder. The gray sky with snowflakes made it hard for people to breathe, as if their hearts were being clenched tightly. He was so envious of Rui and Rui. When could he be like them and not be affected by the cold and heat? He walked outside and saw Yang Fu playing a role-playing game with Fat Tiger and the others. The current Yang Fu no longer had the airs of a prince and could already mingle with them. Fat Tiger looked at Yang Fu, who was lying on the ground, and laughed loudly. Haha, monkey son, no matter how powerful you are, you can't escape from the palms of Buddha Gautama. Yang Fu's face was filled with grief and indignation as he shouted, Jade Emperor Gautama, I old son was deceived by you. I was deceived by you. There were brothels in the village that didn't charge money. They would go to the theater when they had time, and their favorite was Journey to the West. To children this show would never go out of style. Even the 3-year-old Li Duan could watch it with relish. Over the past few months he no longer had many restrictions on Yang Fu. A leopard could not change its spots. Li couldn't guarantee that Yang Fu had turned over a new leaf and awakened some strange overlord attribute that could make the people submit to him with a stomp of his feet, make the emperor of the Wu kingdom bow down to him, give up the throne, and cut off his own head. However, his arrogant and willful personality was nowhere to be seen, and he was no longer as annoying as before. Li Yi felt that his mission had been completed, and he could report to Yang Liuqing now. This period of time could be considered the most stable period of his life in Shuzhou. The various reforms in Shuzhou had passed the most difficult stage, and what followed was a long period of development. With Chen Chong keeping an eye on everything, there wouldn't be any problems. The Land of Chaos had also officially changed its surname to Lu, and it was also in a stable stage of development. Wang Wei was leading a group of people to roll up their sleeves and start construction. All they needed was time. Drunk Mo's due date was the end of February, and there was less than half a month left. With Ruoqing and Rui by her side, she had been in a good mood. Ever since she started practicing martial arts, her physique had become much stronger than before. With a professional delivery team, she didn't have to worry too much. Fang walked in from outside. Li looked at him, but before he could speak, Fang shook his head and said, no. He meant that there was no letter from him. Li Xian hadn't replied to him for almost 3 months. Not only Li Xian but Emingzu and Shanning also didn't reply. The letters he sent out were like stones sinking into the ocean, and there was no reply. No reply, right? He wouldn't write any letters this month either. He would reply when he received his letter. Who's afraid of who, mister? When Li Yi was sitting in the courtyard in a daze, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. This voice was too familiar, so familiar that he could recognize it with his bones. However, he hadn't heard this voice for a long time. Yang Fu wouldn't call him that. In the entire Shuzhou, in the entire Jing kingdom, no one else would call him that. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the girl standing at the door, looking at him in a daze. He suddenly stood up. Because he used too much strength, the stone chair he was sitting on was directly overturned by him. He looked at the girl, turned around and picked up the stone chair. He sighed and sat down again. He had been looking forward to their reply for the past 2 days. He had actually been hallucinating. How could he be in Shuzhou? How could he see Shou Ning in King Jing's imperial residence? Mr. Crack. Li Yi broke the armrest of the stone chair. He stood up in disbelief and said, Shanning, you, how could you? The girl ran over but stopped halfway. Her eyes were full of tears, but there was a smile on her face. She said, I missed you, mister, so I came to see you. When she ran over, Li Yi clearly saw the excitement in her eyes. He didn't know why she stopped, He thought for a moment and stretched out his arms. The girl was startled and then she rushed forward. Li was knocked back a few steps by her. "Mister, I'm so happy." She hung on his body like a koala holding his neck. He didn't know whether she was crying or laughing. He could only hear her vague murmurs. Li Xian walked in quickly from the door. He looked at Li Yi and laughed. "You didn't expect this, did you?" Shanning hurriedly got down from him, wiped her tears, and stood aside in a very ladylike manner. As Li Xian walked over, he stretched out his arms and said, "Long time no see." Li brushed past him and walked to the door. He said in surprise, "Where's Emingzu? Why didn't Emingzu come?" Chapter 1061. Emingzu, Emingzu. Li Xian was not angry at being ignored at all. A trace of embarrassment appeared on his face as he said, "Emingzu is busy with state affairs and doesn't have time to come over." Li looked at Li Xian. 2 years had passed. Although his appearance and temperament had not changed much, the words he said were not like the Li Xian he knew. As the ruler of a country, he could stroll from the capital to Shuzhou, but he said that Emingzu was busy with state affairs. Was this something he could say as an emperor? Was this something a person could say? Li finally couldn't help but ask, "When did you become so shameless?" "You flatter me." Li Xian cupped his hands and said, "I only learned half of your skills." Li Xian was being overly modest. "What 5%? It was at least 50%. Li looked at him and asked, "Did you say she was busy with state affairs or did she say it herself?" Li Xian glanced at him and didn't answer. Instead he asked, "If you want to see her so much, why don't you go back to the capital to see her?" This conversation could not continue. Li turned around. If he had time to chat with Li Xian, he might as well see if Shanning had grown taller and fatter. A girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood. After not seeing her for nearly 2 years, although she did not gain weight, she did grow a lot taller. Before she could not reach his chin, but now she could reach his nose. Xiaonyang. Li Duan ran out of the room and threw himself into Shanning's arms with open arms. Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What did your Li Duan say just now?" "Fragrant." Li thought about it and said, maybe he was talking about the fragrance on her body. Royal sister. She had just put Li Duan down when Yongning pounced on her. Shanning had spent a long time with her. Other than Li Yi, she was the closest person to Yongning in this world. Li Duan and Yongning walked around Shanning. Li Xian looked around and asked, "Can't anyone see me?" Yongning walked over with a red face and said softly, "Imperial brother." When Li Duan saw Li Xian, he quickly ran over. Li Xian squatted down and smiled. "Dwainer is still the best." Li Duan ran to Li Xian's side, looked around and asked in disappointment, "Xiao Rui didn't come?" For an emperor to need to find a sense of presence like this, one couldn't say that no one would do it in the future, but Li Xian was definitely the first. This time he could be considered to be making a private visit in disguise. In truth, it didn't matter whether he was in disguise or not. There was no difference in the capital without Li Xian. Li also didn't make a big fuss, only informing Qin Chong. In all of Shuzhou there weren't many people who recognized him. Although the shameless Li Xian had left Emingzu in the capital, and Li Yi was deeply resentful, Shanning had come here so he had to celebrate. Li Xian, he might as well bring him along. In the back garden of the estate, Li Yi had just started a fire. The servants of the estate were moving the things needed for the picnic to the side. Spring had just begun and today's weather was not bad. The cold of spring had passed and the sun was shining brightly. A picnic after a walk was just right. Drunk Ink couldn't get close to the fire, so she chatted with Rui and watching on the lawn in the distance. "This estate of yours is not bad." Li Xian looked at the garden. The green grass was like a carpet, and the fragrance of flowers assailed his nostrils. A dozen paces ahead, a clear stream flowed by, the sound of water babbling. In terms of size, only the hibiscus garden and Xujiang Manor in the capital could compare. Li didn't reply. After Li Xian became emperor, this bad habit still hadn't changed. Everything was good from other people's homes. In the past few years he had stolen many good things from him. Fortunately he couldn't move this garden. There was no point in being envious, and even if he liked it, it would be a waste. When he started the fire, Shanning stood by his side, holding a fan in her hand, patiently fanning away the rising smoke. She had really changed a lot. Other than the hug when they first met, there was no longer a trace of the arrogant princess. Li was a little happy but also a little sad. She had finally grown from a little girl to a big girl. This was something that a girl had to experience in her life, and it was also a normal transformation. However, the pain experienced in the process of transformation was often heart-wrenching. Mississippi Lu was teaching Yangliuking martial arts on the lawn in the distance. It was said that she had encountered a bottleneck, and if she could break through she would enter a new level. This made Li Yi feel a little depressed. His strength was already about the same as Yangliuking's, and now she had to temporarily shake him off. Her ultimate goal was Mississippi Lu, Mingzu, and the 2 positions at the top of the heaven list. But now not only could he not defeat the bare-breasted and bum Bai Su, he couldn't even defeat Mississippi Lu's disciple. As for Rui himself, he was worried that he would succumb to her despotic power for the rest of his life. Li Xian looked into the distance. At a certain moment he suddenly turned around and said, "Did you notice that your second miss is a little different from before?" If even Li Xian could see it, it meant that Rui had really changed a lot. A few years ago, Li didn't even dare to think that she could actually become so gentle and understanding. Li Xian moved closer to him and whispered, "Tell me honestly, have you secretly taken her down? Take your sister." He couldn't take Li Xian's sister for no reason, but he also couldn't let him be a hindrance here. He waved to Fang and said, "Show him your treasure." Fang was suddenly shocked. Why? Li Yi just wanted to send Li Xian away, so he looked at him and said, "Don't be so stingy." Fang thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "Here?" "Of course he's gone far away," Li Yi said snappily. Although that thing was small, it was very powerful. If one was not careful, it would hurt people. It was safer to go far away. Fang thought for a moment, looked at Li Xian and said, "Come with me." Li Xian followed Fang to a tree in the distance. Seeing him start to untie his belt, he was shocked. "What are you trying to do?" Something fell from Fang's body. Li Xian looked at something on the ground and asked in surprise, "What is this?" Fang looked at the thing on the ground and seemed to understand something. He put on his belt and said proudly, "You haven't seen it before, right? This thing is called the Red Barbarian Cannon. Of course, this is a smaller version, but its power can't be underestimated." Fang picked up a copper tube and a pedestal-like thing and introduced it to Li Xian. "You won't understand even if I explain it to you like this." Li Xian watched as Fang picked up a green brick from the corner and placed it on the ground. Then he placed the strange thing called the Red Barbarian Cannon on the ground. After fiddling with it for a while, he took out a square box from his pocket. He took out a small stick from the square box and used the tip of the stick to scratch the side of the square box. Whoosh! A ball of flame appeared in Li Xian's eyes. "What is this thing?" Looking at Li Xian's shocked expression, Fang was startled and smiled. "I forgot to tell you. This is called a match. You haven't seen it before, right?" Li Xian really hadn't seen it before. He was the dignified emperor of the Jing Kingdom and the president of the Academy of Sciences. Other than Li Yi, he could be said to be the most knowledgeable person in the Jing Kingdom, but today he was looked down upon. Not only that, he was looked down upon twice. Just like how he despised those stubborn and rotten scholars, he was actually despised by old Fang, who had never been educated. He suddenly felt that this trip was worth it. Otherwise, he might have missed out on a lot of interesting things. Seeing that Li Xian kept looking at the match in his hand, Fang's mouth pulled into a smile. To be able to despise an emperor made him feel a little accomplished. Li Xian looked at it and suddenly asked, "Is this real fire?" "Of course it is real," Fang said decisively. Li Xian stared at the match in his hand and asked, "Then why don't you feel any pain when your hand is burned?" Li Yi was listening to Shanning talk about her and Emingzi learning martial arts when he heard Fang's shout in the distance. He glanced in that direction. Wasn't it just to show the power of the mini cannon to Li Xian? Li Xian wasn't shocked, so why was he shouting? Chapter 1062. Bang. When Fang used the match to light the fuse, the strange thing he called the Red Barbarian Cannon disappeared in front of Li Xian. At the same time, the blue brick disappeared as well. The blue brick did not disappear, but was directly smashed into pieces. The scattered pieces fell to the side of Li Xian's feet. Fang ran to the bushes to pick up his treasure. Although this thing was small, exquisite, and powerful, the recoil was not small. Every time it was used, it would jump a few feet away by itself. Li Xian picked up a piece of the blue brick and put it under his nose to sniff it. He smelled the smell of God's punishment. Could God's punishment be used like this? The hard blue brick was simply too fragile in front of this little thing. If it was replaced with a human skull, it would not be much different. It was too fast, so fast that he could not see it clearly. This thing was too powerful. Although Li Xian's martial arts were not high, he estimated that even a martial arts master would not be able to defend against this thing. The mini cannon that had just been fired was a little hot. Fang put it aside to cool down, walked over and asked proudly, "How is it?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, You just said that this is a smaller version. How big is the one that is not shrunk? Fang thought about it and gestured a few times. He realized that he could not make a gesture at all. He shook his head and said, "In short, it is very big. You will know when you see it." Li Xian quickly walked to Li Yi's side. His eyes lit up and he said, "Give me one of these things. This is just a decoration. It is not very useful and it is also dangerous." Li Yi shook his head. The mini cannon was made by him for fun. Although it was powerful, the recoil was too strong. If an ordinary person held it in their hand, one shot would destroy their arm. Even someone as strong as Fang would not be able to handle it. He really did not dare to let Li Xian play with this thing. He also did not intend to let Li Xian study a normal-sized cannon. The Jing kingdom was still in the stage of stable development. They did not attack cities and territories. The Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom were now afraid of them. It was not very useful to have this thing, and God's punishment was enough. Of course, the most important thing was that they were now in the early stage of testing. Although there was a lot of information that could be consulted and used for reference, there was no guarantee that there would not be any mistakes. They had to slowly improve and perfect it. Li Xian sat on the grass and played with the treasure that Fang had just taken out. This thing could be considered a very powerful hidden weapon. Although after listening to Li Yi's explanation he already understood that this thing had a lot of limitations, it did not matter if it had shortcomings. If there were shortcomings they could just improve it. This was what the Academy of Science did. Not afraid of difficulties, not afraid of hardships, and daring to make mistakes. These were the basic qualities that a scientific researcher must have. Fang stood beside Li Xian with a vigilant expression on his face. The more interested Li Xian was in this thing, the more uncertain he felt. He was the emperor and the world was his. If he took a fancy to his treasure, should he give it to him or not? He looked for a while and finally could not help but squat down and said, "Have you seen enough? If you have, give it back to me." Yang Fu squatted on the other side and was scaling a fish in his hand. He had just heard the beautiful sister and his sister's martial uncle mention the two words, Li Han. In this world there were three people he was most afraid of. One was his second brother, another was his sister's martial uncle, and the last one was his sister. Of course, he was afraid of his royal sister because he didn't want his royal sister to be sad. He was afraid of his second royal brother because his second royal brother had killed his father and mother, as well as his eldest royal brother. If he went back, his second royal brother would kill him. He was afraid of his royal sister's martial uncle because he had locked him in a dark room to calculate problems and didn't even give him food. But if he had to say the person he hated the most, it was definitely Li Han. Although he had never seen Li Han and did not even know what he looked like, how good he was at playing marbles, or whether he could urinate as far as he could. But these were not important. What was important was that whether it was Prime Minister Wang or his sister, they always compared him with Li Han, saying how powerful and outstanding Li Han was. In comparison, Yang Fu was like an idiot, so he hated Li Han. He did not like anyone or anything related to Li Han. Therefore, when he found out that the beautiful and gentle sister was Li Han's sister, he did not think she was beautiful or gentle. He touched his chest. There was a snake sewn from a piece of cloth. Fat Tiger had lent it to him to play with. They often used this thing to scare girls. Girls were all afraid of snakes, and Li Han's sister was no exception. She looked even prettier than Fat Tiger's sister, Fat Ya, and looked even more gentle than Fat Ya. When she talked to his sister's martial uncle, even her eyes were smiling. She must be more afraid of snakes than Fat Ya. In the past few months he had already understood that as long as Fat Tiger and the others could do it, he could do it. Using a fake snake to scare girls wouldn't be punished. While Li Han's sister was washing her hands at the stream, Yang Fu quietly followed behind and threw the fake snake into the grass at her feet. He pointed at the grass and said loudly, "Snake, there's a snake." Shaning had squatted down to wash her hands by the stream, but she seemed to be startled by the sound. She waved her hand randomly in the grass beside her, grabbed something and threw it out. Yang Fu was indeed startled when he saw Li Han's sister. He laughed loudly and caught the fake snake, saying loudly, "Coward, that's fake. Are you talking about this?" Yang Fu saw the girl standing by the stream and turned around. She held something in her hand and waved it in front of his eyes. He saw clearly that it was the fake snake he had just thrown. If she was holding the fake snake, then what was the slippery, long, soft and moving thing in his hand? Li Yi was roasting Shaning's favorite mushrooms when he suddenly heard a scream from the stream. When he turned his head, he saw Yang Fu running over from there, his pants wet. His face was pale and he shouted as he ran, "Snake, there's a snake." Yang Fu, who often used fake snakes to scare girls with Fat Tiger, would actually be scared by snakes. Li shook his head and looked at Shanning, who was walking over from the stream. He seemed to understand something. After learning martial arts from Emingzu for 2 years, she was no longer the girl who would be scared by things like mice and snakes 2 years ago. Even Yongning was not afraid of these things. He had found the wrong person this time. Shanning walked over and looked at him with some grievance. She said, "Sir, there was a snake in the grass. I didn't know he was so easily scared. He was so scared by a snake that he peed his pants." Forget it, forget it. It's not the first time he peed his pants." Li Yi waved his hand and handed over the roasted mushrooms. He said, "Try it?" "Thank you, sir." She reached out to take it and used chopsticks to feed Li Yi a piece before eating it herself. Not far away, Yang Fu, who had already changed into a pair of pants, looked over with fear in his eyes. She was so beautiful, looked so gentle, and smiled so sweetly. She wasn't afraid of snakes. She actually used snakes to scare him. Her gentleness was fake and her smile was fake. It was all fake. He finally understood a principle. He couldn't provoke anyone around his royal sister and martial uncle. Shanning had been by his side for the past few days, and Li Yi hadn't seen Yang Fu for a few days. Of course, it wasn't just Shanning. Li Xian had also been inseparable from him these past few days. Li Xian had never been to Shuzhou, but he had been heading west from the capital. He knew that the further west he went, the more desolate it was. Only when he reached the westernmost Shuzhou was everything different. Although the construction of the city couldn't be compared to the capital, in terms of commercial prosperity, the current Shuzhou couldn't even be compared to the capital. Other than here, there was no place like the Jing Kingdom, Qi Kingdom, Zhao Kingdom, and Wu Kingdom that allowed free trade like Shuzhou. Especially after seeing the shopping mall that Li Yi had described to him in the letter at the West Gate, Li Xian knew what kind of place Shuzhou would become in the future. The two of them climbed up the city wall and looked down at the bustling crowd below. Looking at Li Xian's expression, Li Yi casually asked, "Do you regret it?" "I don't regret it." Li Xian shook his head and said, "If I hadn't promised you this back then, there wouldn't be Shuzhou today." He suddenly looked at Li Yi and asked curiously, "If you were to govern the Jing Kingdom in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, what would the Jing Kingdom look like?" If it wasn't in public, Li Yi had the urge to kick Li Xian off the wall. Their family had already lost Emingzu, and Li Xian still wanted to do something to him. Was he worthy of the departed former emperor? Chapter 1063. The previous emperor was wise throughout his life, but the biggest mistake he made was to pass the throne to a fellow who was always thinking of pushing the empire away. You should give up on that thought. This was Shuzhou. Li Yi did not have to give him face. He said without any room for negotiation. "Are you going to stay here for the rest of your life?" Li Xian was not angry at all. He looked at him and asked, "Are you not going to return to the capital?" "Not going back." Shuzhou was a beautiful place with beautiful mountains and clear waters. Its geographical location was unique. Why would he go back to the capital? If he went back to the capital, he would encounter all sorts of disgusting things. Li Xian asked again, "Do you want Emingzu to spend the rest of her life alone in the capital?" Li Xian's words were getting more and more hurtful. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not want to bring him along. "Why do you think she doesn't want to come here?" Li Xian glared at him and said, "Even I know that she doesn't want to come here because she is afraid that once she comes here, she will never want to go back." Li Yi could not answer him. "Emingzu even gave you her hair. How dare you say you don't want to go back to the capital?" Li Xian looked at him and shook his head. "You heartless man. Young master, first Miss asked me to call you back to eat." Fang stood on the city wall and looked at them. He did not finish his sentence and turned around to go down the city wall. Li Yi sighed. Li Xian did not understand Emingzu. The Jing Kingdom could not do without her. Li Xian could travel thousands of miles from the capital to Shuzhou because of a sudden thought, but she would not. She could not let go of things that Li Xian could easily let go of. She was more like an emperor than Li Xian. When Li Xian arrived at Shuzhou, he found everything new and interesting. He was even more fascinated by the industrial base in the depths of the fringe. However, Drunk Mo's due date was approaching, and Li Yi had no time to accompany him, so he had to ask Wang Wei to send someone to pick him up. So far, it was still in the early stages, and the more mature ones were probably smelting and forging. As for the chemical industry, he only dabbled in it. Some time ago he made a match, but it was the most primitive and simple. It was not very safe and it was still being tested and improved. In a short period of time, it was impossible to put it into production. Fang's box was just for fun. He just wanted to show off in front of Li Xian. Li Xian stayed there for 7 days. When he came back he was a little different. His reaction was also within Li Yi's expectations. The Academy of Science mainly focused on theoretical research. Improving farming tools, grinding lenses, inventing some ingenious gadgets, making a model of the solar system and so on. It could only be considered as a small-scale project. The shock brought about by these things was far less than seeing a cannon destroy a building 2 kilometers away. In comparison, what Li Xian did in the Academy of Science was almost like playing house. He sat next to him and looked at him with a strange look for a long time. Li Yi sighed and said, "Don't look at me like that. This thing is too heavy. If you want to carry it back, it will be time-consuming and laborious. Moreover, the research has not been completed and a lot of experiments have to be carried out. Even if you bring it back, it will only be a semi-finished product. There is no need to waste so much effort." Yang Liuqing walked into the room with a pile of clothes and soon came out again. He said, "Uncle Master, I have put your clothes in the room." She was the princess with the least airs of a princess. In order to learn from a master, she put down her pride and became a servant in the Li family for a few months. She served tea, swept the floor and did the laundry. She took all of Xiao Huan's work, and Xiao Huan complained to him many times. Now that she had regained her identity, she still did not put on airs. Everything was almost exactly the same as before. Li Xian did not continue the topic of the red barbarian cannon. He looked at Yang Liuqing, who was walking out of the courtyard, and asked, "Is this the princess disciple of your second miss?" Li Yi nodded. Li Xian thought for a while, looked at him and asked, "Do you accept her?" Li Yi asked doubtfully, "Accept what?" "Accept her." Li Xian had really changed. Back then, he had confidently told him that he would only love the empress in this life. In the end, not long after he left, there was an imperial concubine in the palace. In the blink of an eye, he had slapped his own face. A while ago he was still calling him Brother Shin, and not long after he slept with his own brother. To be friends with this kind of person, one had to be on tenterhooks all the time. Accept her as a concubine? What concubine? That was Mississippi Lou's disciple, his martial nephew. Wasn't this the same as messing around? Xiao Huan was already 19 and she was Rui's servant girl. It was impossible for her to marry someone else. Rui had reminded him many times, but he still could not lay his hands on this adorable little girl. Li Xian still wanted to cause trouble for him. Li Xian took a sip of tea and asked, "Are you not going to help her?" "Oh. The red barbarian cannon will blast all the way. The Wu kingdom does not even have Tianfa. Which city can stop that thing?" Li Xian still could not forget about the red barbarian cannon. Li Yi thought for a while and said, "Why don't you lend me 100,000 soldiers, and I will give you the red barbarian cannon. We can flatten the Wu kingdom." Li Xian felt a little regretful and said, "This is a good idea. Unfortunately, if we really do this, the Wu kingdom will no longer be called the Wu kingdom. The Jing kingdom today could not be compared to 5 or 6 years ago, especially in terms of military strength. If it was not for the fact that Li Xian and the court officials did not have any intention of expanding their territory, this would be the best time to make the Wu kingdom change its surname. With 100,000 soldiers, Tianfa and the cannon, it was enough to flatten the Wu kingdom. However, this was definitely not what Yang Liuqing wanted. She had never mentioned revenge to him. Li Yi knew that she was struggling and hesitating in her heart. Sometimes he could not bear it. As a woman, she carried too many things on her shoulders. However, it was not easy to let go of her parents' vengeance. He could only sigh. This decision was too important. Even he could not make it easily. In a room somewhere, Yang Fu put down his pen and said, "Prime Minister, I finished today's homework. I'm going out to play." Prime Minister Wang walked up to him. After checking, he corrected a few mistakes for him. Then he nodded and said, "Go." It was not until Yang Fu ran out of the room that he sat down at the table and looked out of the door. Her Highness had completed her homework very well. A few small mistakes did not matter. In the past, if Her Highness could calm down and finish her homework, he would definitely be overjoyed and would give her a lot of encouragement. However, King Jing, who was about to turn 15, had a lot of important things to do. He could not let others supervise his homework forever. These days, the faith in his heart that had never been shaken had been shaken many times. "Prime Minister." Yang Liuqing walked in from outside the door. Prime Minister Wang stood up and bowed to her. Then he thought of something and asked, "Your Highness, do you know who the young man who has been with Jiang of Silla these days is?" He was a little confused. He had been observing Jiang of Silla for a long time. Jiang of Silla was the ruler of Shuzhou. When others talked to him, they would be respectful. No one was like that young man who was casual and unrestrained. Also, Jiang of Silla treated him very differently from others. Li Xian, Yang Liuqing said. Li Xian. Prime Minister Wang thought about this name. He felt it was a little familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere. Seeing his confused expression, Yang Liuqing added. He is the current emperor of the Jing kingdom. In fact, there was no need for her to add. Old Minister Wang had already remembered. Wasn't the young emperor of the Jing kingdom called Li Xian? He had a shocked expression on his face. He stood up and said in disbelief, he is the emperor of the Jing kingdom. How could he leave the capital and come to a place so far away from Shuzhou? What about the court? How could the officials agree to it? Yang Liuqing shook her head. She and Li Xian only knew each other. She did not know about these things. Old Minister Wang sat back down. He stroked his beard with a blank expression on his face. He felt like he had grasped something, but it also seemed like he had grasped nothing. But in the end, something was quietly growing in his heart. Chapter 1064. Li realized that old man Wang, who was by Yang Liuqing's side, had been asking him more and more frequently. In the past, 90% of the questions he asked were about the difficult problems in the book, elementary mathematics. Recently he didn't ask about these anymore. Instead he asked about some reform matters in the Jing kingdom. The Jing kingdom had been carrying out reforms in the past few years. Some succeeded, some failed, but in general the reforms were still developing in a good direction. Now the court had found a long-term path that could stabilize the strength of the various classes and improve the lives of the people at the bottom. It was suitable for the development of the Jing kingdom. It wasn't difficult for other countries to know the specific measures of these reforms. They could send some spies to live in the capital for a year and a half, and they could personally and deeply experience all the changes brought about by the reforms. Of course, old man Wang had been on the run with Yang Liuqing. Every day he would think about how to avoid the pursuit of the court of the Wu kingdom and how to restore the dynasty. He didn't have the time or energy to investigate these things. If he was willing to investigate, these were not secrets. Therefore, when Li Yi was free, he wouldn't deliberately avoid this topic. Old man Wang asked a few questions, stroked his beard and asked, I heard that other than the East Palace, there is also a West Palace in your country? The West Palace that old man Wang mentioned wasn't referring to the harem in the usual sense, but Mingzhu's morning dew hall. At the beginning of the 5th year of Jinghe, the previous emperor was gravely ill. As the crown prince, Li Xian took charge of the government and entered the Eastern Palace. Although Mingzhu was the assistant, Li Xian's position was only a pretense. All the matters of the court, big or small, were actually all decided by Mingzhu alone. Gradually, no matter if it was the officials of the court or the common people of the capital, they all got used to calling the place she lived in Western Palace. This habit had been used until now. Li Xian devoted himself to scientific research and didn't care about the court affairs. In name, Mingzhu was an assistant, but she exercised the power of the court. Therefore the name West Palace became even more famous. There was no need to hide this from old man Wang. However, after he heard it, he seemed to be in a trance. He kept muttering, how can this be, and how can this be? Then he left in a daze. Li Yi shook his head. Old man Wang had always wanted to help the Yang Liuqing siblings restore the dynasty, but now the hope was actually very slim. The old man was already old, and whether or not he could withstand this blow depended on his own willpower. He didn't think about it anymore. Drunk Mo would give birth at the end of this month, or at the beginning of next month at the latest. Other than this matter, everything else was a small matter. When the old man surnamed Wang walked into a study, Yang Fu was holding a book and shaking his head. Seeing him walk in, he hurriedly said, Prime Minister, I'm going to memorize it soon. Give me another 15 minutes, just 15 minutes. The old man surnamed Wang stood at the door and looked at Yang Fu with cloudy eyes. He stared at Yang Fu for a long time, making Yang Fu feel weak. He said with a sad face, I just secretly played for a while. Prime Minister, don't be angry. I'll memorize it right away. The old man surnamed Wang walked over, shook his head and said, Your Highness, you don't have to memorize these things anymore. Yang Fu's body stiffened, and then his face became even paler. He sat on the ground and hugged the leg of the old man surnamed Wang. Tears and snot flowed down his face as he cried, Prime Minister, I beg you, don't tell my sister, don't tell that person. I won't be lazy anymore, I won't be lazy anymore. The old man surnamed Wang bowed down and helped him up. He shook his head and said, These things are not what your highness should learn. From today onwards I will teach your highness something new. Yang Fu wiped his tears, felt a little relieved and stood up from the ground. The old man looked at him and asked softly, "Your Highness, do you still remember what your Highness' mission was?" "I remember." Yang Fu wiped his snot and said, To overthrow that traitor who killed his brother and father, and to save the millions of people who are in dire straits." The old man nodded and said, "Your Highness is the future emperor. To be an emperor, one man is the sky with great power to judge the situation, to make the best use of everything, to make the best use of people, to have a broad heart to accommodate the world, to have a broad mind to accommodate all rivers. To be an emperor, you don't have to be knowledgeable, you don't have to be able to compose good poems, you don't have to be able to write beautiful essays, but you can't lack the spirit of an emperor." Yang Fu didn't really understand, but he still kept nodding his head. "This is the way of an emperor." The old man pulled him to sit down at the table and said, "This is what the previous emperor should have taught your Highness. Now that the previous emperor is gone, this old subject can only overstep his boundaries." The old man pressed his two hands on his shoulders, and with a solemn and respectful expression, he said in a serious tone, "Your Highness King Jing, you have to grow up quickly." Yang Fu could only nod his head. "I hope that your Highness will listen carefully to what this old subject is going to say next, and remember it." The old man stood up and said slowly, "The way of a ruler is to retreat and think of treasures. Don't worry about your own affairs, and you know your own blessings and blessings." Yang Fu nodded his head and listened carefully. Gradually, the frequency of his nodding began to slow down, slower and slower. "This subject does not need to be domineering, do not need to be greedy, follow the emperor's instructions." The voice of the old man with the surname Wang gradually became softer. He looked down at King Jing, who was lying on the table blowing bubbles with his snot, and sat down at the table opposite him. He looked at Yang Fu, who was sleeping soundly without any expression on his face. He was motionless like a dead tree, a stone tablet. The days in Shuzhou were actually quite boring. Li Yi yearned for days where he didn't need to worry about anything. He could eat and sleep and occasionally bask in the sun when the weather was good. But if he lived like this every day, wouldn't he be bored to death? In the past, he could still tease Mississippi Lou when he had nothing to do, and add some fun to his dull life. But now Rui had become gentle and she didn't fight with him anymore. No matter what he did, she would just laugh it off. The last bit of fun in his life was gone. Fortunately, Shaning had been staying by his side these days. In the past, she was always mischievous and always had some strange ideas. Although she was a little naughty, it was still a young girl's nature. Now she was like a completely different person. After not seeing her for 2 years, she already had the gentle temperament of a noble. However, whether it was the old Shaning or the current Shaning, she made people feel happy just by looking at her. As long as she was by his side, his mood would be inexplicably better. This time, when Li Xian went out incognito, many experts from the palace were deployed. Some followed him to the land of chaos, and a few stayed behind to protect Shaning. An old nanny followed Shaning closely, but Mississippi Lou felt that the old nanny was not strong enough, so she asked Bai Su to follow her closely to ensure her safety. These few days she and Bai Su, who had no breasts, no buttocks and liked women, had gotten to know each other. In the small courtyard, Shaning held a long sword in her hand, and Bai Su only held a willow branch in his hand, helping her to practice. Shaning had been practicing martial arts for 2 years. With Mingzhu's guidance and the countless books in the palace, 2 years of practicing martial arts was equivalent to 10 years of practice for others. Although she still couldn't make it into the heaven and earth role, she could be considered as a minor expert. Of course, she was still far from the Bai Su who had no breasts and no buttocks, but was ranked 8th on the heaven roll. That's right, just 2 days ago Bai Su had defeated the original 8th on the heaven roll and replaced him. Li Yi felt it was a pity. Although Bai Su's figure was a little flat, she was still pretty. How could she fall in love with a woman? She was so nice to Shaning, so Li Yi was a little worried. Could it be that she had feelings for Shaning? She was only 16, just a child. Women were always very sensitive to men's gazes. Therefore, when Bai Su noticed that Li Yi had been sizing her up for a long time, she stopped feeding Shaning, turned to look at him and said, "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, if you're interested, why don't you come up and have a spar?" Li Yi shook his head without hesitation. There was no need for a spar. With Bai Su, his image as an idol had long collapsed. She just wanted to take revenge on him for patting her chest and stealing her woman. Bai Su glanced at him with disdain, walked forward, picked up the teapot and gulped down a few mouthfuls. Li Yi watched her put down the teapot and thought to himself that an expert was indeed an expert. Even drinking tea so boldly, he thought about it and asked curiously, "Miss Bai, you're not young anymore. Haven't you thought of finding someone to start a family with?" Thinking of this, Bai Su's heart was a little angry again and she glared at him. Li Yi sat a little further away and said, "Don't look at me like that, we're not suitable." Bai Su clenched her fists and her chest rose and fell a few times. Suddenly she smiled and asked, "In the Jiang of Silla family, does anyone use lily-flavored perfume?" "No." Li Yi shook his head. Ever since Zue Mo got pregnant, no one in the residence, from the master to the servant girls, used perfume. Bai Su suddenly walked forward and gave him a gentle hug. With a smile on her face she said softly, "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness Jiang of Silla. I will consider what you said carefully." Li Yi was stunned. He just said it casually just now, he didn't expect Bai Su to really consider it. He suddenly felt a little guilty in his heart. From now on, in this world, he was afraid that there would be another man who would suffer. Then he seemed to think of something and looked at her and asked, "What did you say just now, what lily-flavored perfume?" "Nothing, just casually asking." Bai Su smiled, walked into the courtyard and said to Shanning, "Let's continue." Inexplicable. Li Yi shook his head, stood up and walked into the courtyard inside. Zue Mo should be giving birth in a few days. Rui, Ruoqing, Yang Liuqing and third Miss Chen were all in the courtyard. "Stop." He walked over and said a few words. When he was about to walk back to the study he was stopped by Rui. Rui walked over and walked to his side. She frowned and murmured, "Lily-flavored perfume." Li Yi was stunned. When he raised his head he saw 5 pairs of eyes in front of him looking over. Chapter 1065. He had always been the one tricking others, but this time he was tricked by Bai Su. The fragrance of lilies was light and elegant, and the scent was very faint. After a long time, other than people like Rui who had sharp senses and a nose better than a dog's, it was impossible for ordinary people to smell it. He thought that Bai Su had found her conscience and was grateful to him, but his kindness was not reciprocated. How petty could a woman be? Even if he had a clear conscience he still felt guilty when he was stared at by these 5 pairs of eyes. "Rui, come with me." He had to prove his innocence no matter what. Rui knew that Bai Su liked women. Mississippi Lu had sharp eyes, so how could she fall for such a clumsy trick? He and Rui walked to the courtyard outside, and Bai Su was still sparring with Shanning. Ahem ahem. Li Yi walked to her side and was almost choked to death by the strong perfume smell. This time it was the smell of roses. Mississippi Lu looked at him, waiting for him to explain. Li Yi looked at Bai Su, waiting for her to explain. It was still the smell of lilies just now, and she had sprayed so much rose perfume in less than 5 minutes. Wasn't it a waste? Shanning walked over, held Mississippi Lu's wrist and said, "Sister Rui, can you spar with me? My royal sister said that you are very good at martial arts, and there are still many things I don't understand that I want to ask you." A fresh and elegant smell came from her body. It was the smell of lilies. Mississippi Lu looked at Li Yi, then turned to look at Shanning and said, "Okay, come with me to the courtyard inside." Cute girls were always popular, and even Mississippi Lu was no exception. Shanning was very popular when she was playful, and when she was obedient she was even more popular. The one who was not popular was the small-chested, narrow-minded, cunning Bai Su. Bai Su glanced at him and said indifferently, "Consider yourself lucky this time. People with small chests don't have the right to speak." Li Yi also glanced at her and walked back into the courtyard. Bai Su's eyes were wide open, and her chest was heaving up and down. It looked like it was a little bigger. Shanning made everyone happy, especially after Li Xian went to the mountain. Without that eyesore, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became much more harmonious. Li Yi returned to his study and picked up a few letters. The letters were about the problems the fringe was facing. After reading the 2 letters, Mississippi Lu, who seemed to have just taken a shower, walked in with her wet hair. "That perfume just now was Bai Su's, right?" "Ah. Bai Su likes to use lily-scented perfume." Mississippi Lu tied up her hair and stood in front of the mirror. She said, "Don't worry, I won't misunderstand. Bai Su won't like you and you won't like her." "What?" Li Yi was puzzled. He could understand why Bai Su wouldn't like him. After all, they had different sexual orientations. It was just like how he wouldn't like Fong or Li Xian. Why was Mississippi Lu so sure that he wouldn't like Bai Su? Was it because she had small breasts? Because you don't like small breasts. Rui's words made it seem as if he had some discrimination against women with small breasts. Although there was a reason for this, it only accounted for 80%. She was narrow-minded, cunning, and unfeminine, which accounted for the remaining 20%. As drunk Mo's due date approached, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became tense. Even Li Duan was much quieter than before. Several times he ran over to ask him and Rui if second mother was going to give birth to a younger brother or sister. The professionally trained delivery team was preparing 24 hours a day and resting in shifts. When Xiaozue ran over and said that drunk Emo was about to give birth, the tense atmosphere in the prince's mansion reached its peak. Rui held his hand tightly. She was even more nervous than when she gave birth to her own child. Li Yi wanted to go in to accompany her, but Rui's attitude was very firm. She said that it was unlucky for a man to enter the delivery room, but drunk Emo didn't agree. Li Yi could only be superstitious. He didn't dare not to be superstitious. It was already a mystery that he could appear in this world. If he questioned the existence of gods at this time, who knew if he would be punished? After a long time, a midwife opened the door and came out. She smiled and said, "Congratulations, Prince. It's a little princess. Both mother and daughter are safe." Reward. Li Yi breathed a sigh of relief and strode into the room. Yesterday was a joyous day in the prince's mansion. All the maids and servants were rewarded with a year's salary. All the servants who had worked in the prince's mansion knew that the prince was very generous to the servants. The salary they received was definitely not the number written on the surface. It was often more than 10 times or even dozens of times higher. It was said that the first midwife who came out yesterday to report that she was safe received a reward of 1,000 taels of silver. She was so excited that she fainted on the spot. When would the third madam be pregnant, and when would the princess be pregnant again? It was really something to look forward to. Before one became a father, one would never understand what it was like to be a father. The eldest daughter of the Li family fell asleep. Lying next to drunk Emo, Li Duan stood by the bed with his hands behind his back, watching without blinking. He had a younger sister and there would be someone to play with him in the future. Father said that he was the eldest brother, and he had to protect his younger sister in the future. As a man, he understood this even without father saying it. When his little sister grew up, he would be able to bring his little sister to play on the slide, swing, and buy her candied fruits and candied fruits. If there were any boys who used fake snakes to scare her, he would beat them up until they were looking for their teeth on the floor. Little Ant had said that when he grew up, she would teach him martial arts. Little Ant's martial arts were very powerful. She could beat father until he ran around everywhere. If he learned martial arts from her, he would definitely become as powerful as her. Li Yi looked at this pair of children and once again felt that the heavens had treated him well. He had a few beautiful wives and a pair of children. Compared to his previous life when he was forced to go on blind dates everywhere, his life now was much better. That kick was not in vain and that fire was not in vain. Li Duan watched for a while and ran out. He wanted to find little Ant to teach him martial arts so that he could protect his younger sister. Drunk Emo leaned against the side of the bed and tilted her head. She looked at her daughter, who had not yet grown up, with a smile on her face. She had told Li Yi a long time ago that she hoped to have a daughter. She could draw, sing and dance. Their daughter would inherit everything from her and become the little goddess of Luo Shui. The name of the young lady of the Li family was also something that she and Li Yi had discussed a long time ago. Whether it was a boy or a girl, there were a few names that could be chosen. In the morning, Li Yi and drunk Emo deliberated for a while and chose one from among them. Li Mu. Mu meaning longing and attachment. Her name contained too much. Before he and drunk Emo got together, they had gone through hardships and twists and turns. From Qing and prefecture to the capital, from the capital to the Qi kingdom, they had gone around in circles before they finally had the happiness they had today. Drunk Emo had expended too much energy yesterday. After Li Yi coaxed her to sleep, he gently closed the door and walked into the yard. Rui sat alone at the stone table looking into the distance. Li Yi walked over and sat beside her. He held her hand and asked in a low voice, "What are you thinking about?" Rui smiled and said, "Dwainer just went to find Rui. He said that he wanted to learn martial arts well so that he could protect his sister in the future." Li Yi shook his head and said, "He is still too young to endure that hardship. Let's wait for another 2 years. Let's see if he can persevere. I have also started practicing basic skills since I was 3 years old." As she spoke, she leaned on Li Yi's shoulder and murmured, "Can I have another child with my husband?" Because of her physique, it was difficult for Rui to get pregnant. The birth of Li Duan made Li Yi's legs feel weak even now. He held her waist and said softly, "Yes, really, really?" Li Yi nodded and said, "My wife, don't worry. We have plenty of time." Chapter 1066. Li Yi wondered if it was in a woman's nature to forget her husband after giving birth. It was like this when Rui gave birth to Li Duan, and it was the same after Zuemo gave birth to Li Mu. The young princess of the Li family, Li Mu, was now the apple of everyone's eye. At home she was much more popular than Li Duan and himself. Li Duan wanted to learn Kung Fu from Mississippi Liu, so Mississippi Liu handed him over to Yang Liuqing for the time being. He swore to protect his sister, so he had to practice Kung Fu with tears in his eyes. Fortunately, although it was hard, he persevered. Li Duan was already 3.5 years old, so it would be good for him in the future if he could train his body a little. Women in confinement needed special care, so Li Yi had not been idle these days. He had taken into consideration both nutrition and taste. He had put in a lot of effort. Li Xian had been in the land of chaos, and he had sent a letter saying that he would be back tomorrow. This also meant that they would not stay in Shuzhou for long, and they would be returning to the capital. Although one less Li Xian in the capital was not a big deal, he was still the emperor. Even if he could not stay in the capital, he could not always wander outside. So, Shanning had been in low spirits since yesterday. Li Yi thought for a long time, then looked at her and said, "If he doesn't want to go back, let him go alone." Shanning raised her head and smiled. She said, "Gathering and parting. When there is gathering, there will be parting, and when there is parting, there will be reunion. Parting is for a better reunion. There is mother, sister, and many things to do in the capital. I can't always be outside." Li Yi did not speak anymore. Shanning lowered her head and was silent for a while. Then she ran to the side, picked up a branch, and drew crisscrossed lines on the ground. She said, "Sir, let's play chess, beast chess." Beast chess was the first game that Li Yi taught her, and it was also the first game that she knew. It was taught by Li Yi to her, and after she carried it forward, it quickly became popular in the capital, especially among young children. She played very slowly and methodically. This made it difficult for Li Yi to use ultimate moves such as Little Dumbo, Tigger, and the universe's invincible celestial hound. Fortunately, he won and lost this time, and the probability of winning and losing was between 50 and 50. This made him even more sad. He knew that in chess he would never have a chance to surpass Shanning in his life. He could not believe that she could actually win and lose one game, and she could not win one game more. As the game went on, even Bai Su, who was standing behind, saw it and looked at him with slight contempt. So the game of chess could not go on. He looked at the time, and it was almost time to prepare dinner. These days, Drunk Ink's food was taken care of by him alone, including the ingredients, and he personally went to the market to pick the freshest. Shanning carried a small cloth bag and followed behind him, just like a little attendant. These days, except for sleeping in very few times, she would hardly leave his side more than 5 steps. If it were not for Bai Su also following behind, this must have been a flawless day. Su seemed to have made a breakthrough recently. Li Yi had not seen him for several days, but it did not matter. He just went out to buy vegetables, and he did not need a guru to escort him every time. What's more, although Bai Su had a small chest, a small heart, and a lot of shortcomings, her advantages were also very obvious. 8th on the heaven list, she was definitely a qualified bodyguard. With Fang in Yong County, she could almost do whatever she wanted. Coincidentally, they met Yang Fu and the others on the street. The old man with the surname Wang, Yang Fu, and a few guards walked slowly on the street, talking to Yang Fu as they walked. In the past, old man Wang often asked him some questions or talked about some things about the Jing kingdom. Later, for unknown reasons, he rarely came. Instead, when he was talking to Yang Fu about the way of the emperor, the latter often fell asleep on the table. Li Yi could understand Yang Fu because the prime minister's voice had a unique charm, even he wanted to sleep when he heard it. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla." The old man with the surname Wang also saw him, and cupped his hands to salute him. Li Yi looked at him. "Prime Minister, this is..." The old man with the surname Wang cupped his hands and said, "Shuzhou used to be the poorest and most chaotic place in the Jing kingdom, but in just 2 years, it has become so prosperous and rich. This old man brought His Highness King Jing out to have a look, hoping that your highness can learn something from it." Li Yi looked at Yang Fu and found that his eyes were staring at the fruit-candied haws on the street stalls, and there was a look of longing in his eyes. He felt that old man Wang was still a little too hasty. So what if he learned it? The reason why Shuzhou had become the Shuzhou it was now was not only because of its unique geographical advantage, but also because it was his territory, and he could do whatever he wanted. The Wu kingdom was still in someone else's hands. Even if Yang Fu learned it, it would be in vain. Li Yi bought a fruit-candied haw for Shanning and Yang Fu, and the longing and envy on Yang Fu's face disappeared. Just as he was about to wave goodbye to them, a group of carriages slowly drove over from afar. The man in the lead looked left and right and suddenly walked over. He asked the old man with the surname Wang, "May I ask, old man, how do I get to the Yong County government?" The old man didn't answer but looked at him and asked, "Are you from the Wu kingdom?" The man was surprised. "Old man, how do you know?" The old man with the surname Wang thought about it and said, "If this old man guessed correctly, you should be from the Zhangzhou of the Wu kingdom, right?" The man's face was even more surprised and he sighed, strange old man, could it be that you're a fortune teller?" Seeing that he admitted it, the old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, "If you're not from the Zhangzhou, how can you have a Zhangzhou accent? Although this old man is old, his ears are still good, and I can still recognize the dialect of my hometown." Leaving home at a young age and coming back when he was old, his accent never changed and his hair on his temples withered. Although Elder Wang's experience had nothing to do with this poem, to be able to meet someone from his hometown in a foreign country was something worth celebrating no matter what. The old man surnamed Wang looked at the group and asked, "What are you doing here?" The man sighed and said, "Old man, you might not know this, but Zhangzhou has fallen into the hands of that dog of a court, and the people have no way to live. We were originally merchants of Zhangzhou, but we were really forced by that dog of a court to be afraid, so we thought of coming to Shuzhou to find a way to survive." He sighed and said, "It's better when Her Royal Highness is here. It's a pity that Her Royal Highness—" There were many merchants from the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom in Shuzhou. As long as they were doing proper business, they would not be discriminated against here after registering in the county government. The old man with the surname Wang naturally knew about these things. However, he was originally the Prime Minister of the Wu Kingdom. Now that he saw that the people of the Wu Kingdom had no choice but to flee to a neighboring country to avoid disaster, he only felt sorrow in his heart, and a certain belief in his heart became even more resolute. "You don't know where the Yong County government is?" The man looked at him and said with a smile, "Let's ask someone else." The old man surnamed Wang shook his head and pointed ahead with a somewhat depressed expression. He said, "The Yong County government is just in front." "Thank you, old man." The man cupped his hands at him and turned to look at the group behind him. He said, "It's been a long journey and we're almost there. Everyone hold on a little longer." A group of more than 10 people pulled 4 carriages. The carriages were filled with children's toys such as windmills, rattledrums, masks, wooden swords and wooden swords. When the last carriage passed by, a man casually took down a windmill from the carriage and handed it to Yang Fu, who was standing by the side of the road licking the candied haws. He said with a smile, "Little brother, this is for you." Yang Fu was licking the candied haws and subconsciously reached out to take it. Suddenly, a tender voice came from behind him. "Dodge." The man held the windmill with a kind smile on his face. However, when his hand was halfway through, a trace of viciousness quickly appeared on his face. His speed suddenly increased and from the gap between his index and middle fingers, a bit of blue light shone out. Chapter 1067. While Yang Fu was frozen in place, Shouning kicked the man's hand away. The kindness on the man's face turned into ruthlessness. He suddenly withdrew his arm and his fist, which was glowing with blue light, smashed toward her calf. Of course he didn't have the chance. Bai Su sent him flying with a kick. With just one kick he could no longer get up. The poisonous needle between his fingers fell to the ground, glowing blue in the sunlight. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom, who had asked the old man surnamed Wang for the direction of the county government, had one hand in the carriage but he couldn't pull it out. He lowered his head and found a hand pressing his wrist. When he turned his head, the strong man next to the young man grinned at him and said with a smile, "What do you want?" Then everything went black and he felt a great pain in his neck. He lost consciousness. The old man surnamed Wang instantly reacted and shouted, "Protect His Highness." Yang Fu had already been surrounded by a few guards who had accompanied him. The dozen or so people had already drawn their swords and sabers. Li Yi stood motionless while Bai Su protected Shou Ning. Old Fong was like a black bear, killing one person with each slap. His fighting style was so violent that normal people would not be able to withstand a single slap from him. This group of people could be considered to have some skills, but they were no match for Old Fong, who was a beast in human form. He was strong and fast, giving them no time to react at all. In just a few breaths, no one could even stand and speak. Since second granduncle's devilish training, Fong was the best weapon against enemies who weren't strong individually and had a large number of people. The old man surnamed Wang was relieved and hurriedly said, His Highness King Jing, His Highness is here." A voice came from behind. The old man surnamed Wang turned his head and saw the 2 guards next to King Jing lying on the ground, each holding one of their arms. Their faces were full of shock and disbelief. The other 2 bodyguards placed their weapons against the pale-faced Imperial Prince Jing's neck. It was hard to guard against a thief in the family. Li Yi looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said in disbelief, "There's a traitor among you, No matter how meticulous Shanning's observation was, no matter how brave Fang was, and no matter how powerful Bai Su was, they couldn't stand the fact that there was a traitor among Yang Fu's guards. Li Yi was a little disappointed. What kind of soldiers did his martial nephew have? There were only a few of them, and among them, there were even traitors planted by others to stab them in the back at critical moments. Old man Wang's expression changed greatly. He pointed at them and said with a trembling voice, "You, we let His Highness escape last time in the Thorns Ridge. If we fail again this time, His Majesty will not let us off." A guard looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said, "Prepare 2 fast horses for us and send us to the Qi Kingdom. Otherwise I will kill King Jing right now." The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he said angrily, "How dare you?" The man sneered and said, "I'm going to die either way. It's worth it if I can drag King Jing down with me before I die." Yang Fu's face was already pale and bloodless. He shouted, "No, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Prime Minister, give them horses, give them horses." The old man surnamed Wang looked at Li Yi. Li Yi looked in Yang Fu's direction. That knife was on his neck and there was already a trace of blood. With just a light cut, Yang Luqing would have to rebel and become the empress. After thinking about it carefully, Li Yi hurriedly suppressed this immoral idea. He looked at the old man surnamed Wang and lightly shook his head. Shaking his head meant that it was too dangerous. If they weren't careful, they would have to let their princess become the empress, so he agreed to their conditions for the time being. The old man surnamed Wang clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "Fine, I promise you, don't hurt King Jing." "Wait a moment." The guard looked left and right, then suddenly opened his mouth and said. He pointed at Shanning, who was protected by Bai Su, and said, "Let her come over." The old man surnamed Wang was startled. Li Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. Yang Fu, who had the knife on his neck, seemed to see a glimmer of hope. He shouted, "Yes, she is the princess of the Jing Kingdom. She is more important than me, she is more important than me. Just tie her up. Let me go, let me go." The old man surnamed Wang's body swayed. He looked at Yang Fu as if he was looking at a stranger. His lips trembled, but he couldn't say a word. If it weren't for this little princess, King Jing would have been dead. How could he say such a thing? His body also began to tremble. His eyes dimmed and his face was ashen. The guard had just said it casually. He could only see that the girl was of noble status, but he didn't expect her to be so noble. If he tied her up, wouldn't their chances of escaping be greater? He pointed at Shanning again and said loudly, "Let her come over or I will kill King Jing right now. If we die together. Then let's kill her." Li Yi walked over and took Shanning's hand. He said, "Let's go home. If we go home late, the fish won't be fresh." It was because the fish purchased by the residents wasn't fresh that he and Shanning came out to buy live fish. If the fish were dead, they would have to come out to buy it again. He looked back at Fang and said, "Don't forget to have someone clean the floor later." The 2 guards looked at him with a stunned and shocked expression. "Then kill him." This was King Jing, not some random cat or dog. How could he just kill him? If he killed King Jing, what reason could the princess and the others have to rebel? How could this person do this? "You want to harm me, you want to harm me." Yang Fu's face became even paler. His face was full of despair. He shouted, "My royal sister will not let you go, my royal sister will not let you go." Li Yi sighed. He didn't sigh for Yang Fu but for himself. He thought that Yang Fu was just a naughty and spoiled child. As long as he put in some effort, he would be able to bring him back to the right path. Obviously he was too naive. The surrounding crowd had already retreated when the group of people took action. They were watching from afar. You. One of the guards pointed at Li Yi and said angrily, "Don't think that I don't dare to do it." Li Yi waved his hand. "You do it? I'm watching." The 2 of them were stunned. They didn't know whether to advance or retreat. After 2 strange sounds, the 2 of them fell to the ground at the same time. There were 2 swallowtail darts stuck between their eyebrows. Yang Fu also fell to the ground. There was a stench coming from his lower body. Li Yi looked at Bai Su, who was holding 2 darts in her hands. Bai Su turned to look at him at the same time. He swore in his heart that he would never laugh at her for having a small chest again. The Yamen runners began to separate the crowd and gathered here. Fang pointed at the 12 people on the ground and said, "Take them back to the county office first." Then he pointed at the 2 people with darts between their eyebrows and said, "Take the bodies away." The old man surnamed Wang came to his senses. His eyes were dull. He looked at King Jing, who was paralyzed on the ground and had lost control of his bowels. He walked over and slowly squatted down. He didn't mind it. He picked him up and walked toward the crowd step by step. Ouch! The crowd dispersed. Hearing the sound, Li Yi hurriedly turned his head and looked at Shanning. He asked with concern, "What's wrong?" She frowned and whispered, "I was careless just now and sprained my ankle. Go back and ask Sister Rui to take a look at it." Li Yi squatted down to check and found that it was not serious. It was just a little swollen. He must have sprained his ankle. He turned his back to her and said, "Get up." Shanning blushed. She lay on Li Yi's back and put her arms around his neck. She said with a red face, This is not good." He had never seen anyone so happy after spraining their ankle. Li Yi tilted his head and looked at her. Shanning put her arms around his neck and asked, "Sir, I sprained my ankle. Can I not go back to the capital right away?" "Go back to the capital? Let's recover first." Li Yi turned his head and said angrily. She lay on Li Yi's back with a happy smile on her face. She felt that the pain in her ankle was not as bad anymore. Li Yi carried Shanning on his back. He looked at Bai Su who was walking beside him and suddenly said, "Miss Bai." Ever since he saw her skill with darts he felt that as a man he shouldn't be too stingy. He should take the initiative to find a chance to repair their relationship. "What?" Bai Su crossed her arms and glanced at him. She said emotionlessly, "I have a few secret recipes here." He glanced at her chest and said, "They can improve your figure?" Bai Su was stunned at first. After she understood what he meant, she immediately blushed and said angrily, "What do you mean?" "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li Yi shook his head. Since she didn't care, he wouldn't say anything. Shanning lay on his back and giggled. Bai Su lowered her head and remained silent. After a while, she turned to look at him and asked softly, "The secret recipes you mentioned really work?" Chapter 1068. Li Yi didn't expect Bai Su, who could only be considered half a woman, to care about her figure. He generously told her the secret recipe of the breast enhancement soup. He didn't have to worry that the effect wouldn't make her angrier. After all, this was personally tested by Emingzu. Bai Su wasn't even as good as Emingzu in the past, so the effect would definitely be more obvious. No matter how stingy this woman was after drinking his soup, she wouldn't stab him with a dart, right? Shanning's ankle was really sprained, but it wasn't too serious. Rui took a look and massaged her for a while. She told her that as long as she had a good rest, she would recover in 3 to 5 days. Who would have thought that after Rui warned her for a while, she couldn't help but get out of bed. As a result, she tripped at the door and sprained her ankle even more seriously. This time, it wouldn't be a matter of 3 to 5 days. She would have to rest in bed for at least a month to ensure that she would recover to the same state as before she was injured and not leave any future problems. As her injury worsened, she seemed to be even happier. When Li Yi walked out of her room, he actually heard her humming a tune. Yang Fu had already taken a shower and used a lot of soap. There wasn't a trace of the stench on his body anymore. There wasn't a single guard in the room, so he felt more at ease. He was afraid of guards now. Prime Minister Wang stood in the middle of the hall. There was a brown stain on his body that emitted a foul smell. The smell made Yang Fu want to vomit, but he couldn't vomit because it was the smell he got when the Prime Minister carried him back after he had lost control of his bladder. He still hadn't recovered from today's events. He had nearly died when the man had handed him the windmill, when the guard had put his sword to his throat. He had nearly died. He touched his neck. There was a blood stain on it and it still hurt a little when he touched it. If the knife was a little sharper, his head wouldn't be on his neck anymore. Fortunately, everything was over. That man actually let those 2 traitors kill him. When his imperial sister returned, he must tell her about this. "Your Highness." The old man surnamed Wang ignored the stench on his body and took a few steps forward. Prime Minister." Yang Fu raised his head and looked at him. He didn't know why, but although the Prime Minister was very calm at this moment, he felt that the Prime Minister was very scary. Prime Minister Wang walked in front of Yang Fu and slowly sat down. He asked, "Your Highness, do you still remember the way of the Emperor that I taught you?" I remember everything." Yang Fu was overjoyed and immediately said, "To be an emperor, one man is the heavens. With great power in hand, one must judge the situation, make the best use of everything, make the best use of people, have a broad heart to accommodate the world, and have a broad mind to accommodate all rivers. As an emperor, there is no need for him to be knowledgeable. He may not be able to compose good poems or write beautiful essays, but he must have the spirit of an emperor." He secretly rejoiced that he had memorized this part. who knew that Prime Minister Wang would test him at this time. The old man nodded and asked, "Does your highness know what the spirit of an emperor is?" Yang Fu was startled. He then shook his head and said, "The Prime Minister didn't teach me." The old man thought about it and let out a long sigh. He slowly said, "I indeed didn't teach you. But your highness must remember that some things don't need to be taught. If you don't teach me, how would I?" Yang Fu secretly muttered in his heart, but his face revealed an enlightened expression. He said, "Yang Fu will definitely follow the Prime Minister's teachings and learn the way of the Emperor." The old man shook his head and said, "Your highness doesn't need to learn these things in the future, really?" Yang Fu raised his eyebrows and was overjoyed. The way of the Emperor was too long for him to memorize. It would be best if he didn't have to learn it in the future. "Your highness doesn't need to complete your daily homework in the future. Do whatever you want to do." The old man waved his hand and didn't look at Yang Fu again. He turned around and left. Yang Fu was still standing there in a daze. In the future he didn't need to learn anything and could do whatever he wanted? This was supposed to be a happy thing, but why did he feel a chill in his heart? Yang Liuqing quickly walked into the courtyard and hurriedly asked, "Is the Prime Minister and Yang Fu okay?" She only heard that Prime Minister Wang and Yang Fu were assassinated outside today, so she hurried back. Wei Liang, who was waiting here, immediately said, "Your Highness, the Prime Minister and King Jing are fine." Yang Liuqing asked, "Where are they?" "King Jing is in his room." Wei Liang said, "The Prime Minister is also in his room. The Prime Minister said that if your Highness comes back, please go and see him first." Yang Liuqing nodded and quickly walked to a courtyard. She knocked on the door. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room. "Come in." Yang Liuqing pushed the door and entered. Prime Minister Wang was standing in the room. He was wearing an official robe and a high crown. He knelt down in front of her and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor." "I'm sorry, your highness." Yang Liuqing was shocked and hurried forward to help him up. She said, "Yang Fu is not injured. Prime Minister, you don't have to blame yourself. I'm not referring to today's assassination." The old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, "Before the former emperor passed away, he entrusted King Jing to me. He hoped that I could set things right and support King Jing as the emperor. But I'm afraid that I can't fulfill the former emperor's last wish." Yang Liuqing's face turned pale. She looked at him and asked in a trembling voice, "Prime Minister, what do you mean?" The old man looked at her and asked, "Your Highness, do you know what happened today?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. "That little princess saved him. If it wasn't for that little princess of the Jing kingdom, would King Jing still be alive?" The old man with the surname Wang closed his eyes and said in a sorrowful voice, "But what is he doing? He wants to exchange his savior's life for his own. Such a heartless person who is worse than a beast, what right does he have to sit on that throne?" He knelt down again. Tears streamed down his face. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor entrusted me. I didn't teach him well." Yang Liuqing stood there in a daze. She couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. Her father and brother were killed. Her mother was forced to commit suicide. They had been on the run, gathered their forces and gradually fought back. They only had one goal. They wanted to suppress Emperor Wu, who killed his brother and father. They wanted to support the former emperor's son, King Jing, as the emperor. Giving up on King Jing meant giving up on themselves. Without this reason they were traitors and plotting a rebellion. It made a big difference to them whether King Jing became the emperor or not. However, as Prime Minister Wang said, Yang Fu, he didn't deserve to be the emperor. "That's good." After a long silence, a smile of relief finally appeared on her face. She helped Prime Minister Wang up and said, "Let General Wei and General Chen dismiss those officers and soldiers. Let them divide the rest of the money. I've always made a mistake. In fact, your highness has also made this mistake." The old man shook his head and said, "King Jing is only King Jing. He can't represent anyone except himself. He can't represent the officers and soldiers and he can't represent the world." Yang Liuqing was startled and looked at him. The old man knelt down again and kowtowed to Yang Liuqing 3 times. When he raised his head, his expression was solemn. He said in a loud voice, "I beg your highness, for the sake of the former emperor's last wish, for the sake of the people of the Wu kingdom, to suppress the traitors, to ascend the throne." Chapter 1069. Suppress the rebels and ascend the throne as the emperor. Yang Liuqing looked at Prime Minister Wang, who had a solemn expression on his face. His lips parted and he said with difficulty, How is this possible?" Why is it not possible? Prime Minister Wang raised his head and looked at her with bright eyes. He asked, Your Highness has been in the Jing Kingdom for a long time. Do you know the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom? Yang Liuqing nodded subconsciously. The eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, Li Emingzu, was unparalleled in beauty and martial arts. She also had the ability to govern the country. She was close friends with her martial uncle. She was her master's strong rival in love. Prime Minister Wang gritted his teeth and said, Since the Jing Kingdom has a princess in charge, why can't our Wu Kingdom have an empress? But, Prime Minister Wang looked at her and continued to ask, Your Highness, do you think that we can still pin our hopes on Imperial Prince Jing? Yang Liuqing shook her head. If that's the case. Prime Minister Wang kowtowed again and said loudly, This old official sincerely requests Your Highness to ascend the throne. The door was pushed open with great force and two figures walked in quickly. Wei Liang knelt down on one knee, raised his head and said loudly, This official sincerely requests Your Highness to ascend the throne. Qin Qing knelt down next to Wei Liang and said respectfully, This official sincerely requests Your Highness to ascend the throne. Yang Liuqing looked at their solemn expressions and couldn't help but take a few steps back. A certain sturdy wall in his heart seemed to be shaken at this moment. Li Yi used the extremely sharp dagger that Mississippi Lu gave him to make a crutch for Shanning. If she really had to lie in bed for a month, she would probably die of boredom. In order to stay here for a longer period of time, she purposely sprained her ankle and worsened her injury. Li Yi was angry and distressed. She wanted to find a suitable reason to stay. Why did she need to do this? When Li Xian came back tomorrow, she could pretend to break his leg by accident and let him stay here for a year or so. Wouldn't that be simpler and more effective? Fang walked in from outside and said, Son-in-law, those guys were still stubborn at first, pretending to be tough guys. Later on, after a little torture, they were all released. The so-called tough guy was only relatively speaking. Fang's, a little bit of torture, was definitely not as simple as he said. However, this was no longer important. He polished the edges and corners of his walking stick and casually asked, Were they sent by the Emperor of the Wu Kingdom? Yes and no. Fang shook his head. After thinking for a moment, he said, They are not merchants of the Wu Kingdom. They are all killers. The heads of Princess Duanrong and Prince Jing are worth 100,000 taels of silver each. Someone sent an invitation to the martial arts world of the Wu Kingdom. If anyone can catch Princess Duanrong and that bastard Yang Fu, no matter whether they are dead or alive, they will offer 200,000 taels of silver with both hands. 200,000 taels of silver as a reward for two people was undoubtedly a big deal. The one who had such a deep hatred for them and wanted them dead the most was the Emperor of the Wu Kingdom. To be exact, Yang Liuqing had a deep hatred for him. He was just worried that they would threaten his throne. Fang continued to say, The two of them are currently the highest on the bounty list. They should have been targeted by many killers. A month ago, someone spread the news that they are in Shuzhou. As for the two guards, they may be spies of the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom. They have been hiding around them for a long time. This time they should want to take advantage of them. However, I didn't expect that woman. Seeing Bai Su coming out of Shanning's room, Fang glanced at her and continued to say, I didn't expect Bai Su to be so good at martial arts. Her skill in using concealed weapons is even superb and exquisite. It is rare in the human world and hard to find in the heavens. In short, Miss Yang and the others have been targeted by many people. If they go out alone, they should be extra careful. After Fang finished speaking, Yang Liuqing walked in from outside with Yang Fu. Kneel down. When she walked up to Li Yi, she glanced at Yang Fu, who had his head lowered, and said coldly, Plop. Although Yang Fu was full of reluctance, he still knelt in front of Li Yi. Yang Liuqing looked at Li Yi with an extremely complicated expression. After a long time he slowly said, Yang Fu is ungrateful and did such a thing. It's all because I didn't discipline him well. Please punish me, martial uncle. You are you and he is he. Li Yi waved his hand and said, You have been secretly offered a bounty in the Wu Kingdom. The bounty is 100,000 taels of silver for each of you. There should be countless people targeting you. When you go out, be more careful. In addition, I don't know if there are spies of the imperial court among your people. It's better to thoroughly investigate them. Don't let today's incident happen again. I understand. Yang Liuqing nodded, glanced at Yang Fu and said, Yang Fu, you go and kneel outside. Yang Fu didn't dare to disobey him, so he knelt outside. When the maids and servants passed by him, they couldn't help pointing at him. This is the King Jing of the Wu Kingdom. He's still a prince. He's ungrateful and returns kindness with enmity. At such a young age, His heart is already so vicious. When he grows up, Yang Liuqing didn't say how long he wanted Yang Fu to kneel, but he only knelt for less than 10 hours before he fainted. It was unknown whether he was embarrassed or kneeling. A person's bad nature was completely revealed in this 14-year-old child. If he wasn't a child, or if he wasn't Yang Liuqing's younger brother, Li Yi would let him know the price of doing wrong and saying wrong things. However, he didn't have the slightest interest in Yang Fu. This child was already useless. Whether they wanted to live in seclusion in the countryside or wanted to continue to rebel and support Yang Fu as the emperor, it had nothing to do with him. He had to look after Shawnee. He was worried that she hadn't recovered from her foot injury and would jump out of bed again. In the afternoon, Old Man Wang came to find him. At that time he was massaging Shawnee's sprained foot. She was giggling because of the itch. The massage technique was taught to him by Bai Su. She said that she didn't want to owe others a favor. In the martial arts world, it's not a burden to have more skills. Looking at the horoscope to predict one's luck, relaxing the muscles and blood, massaging to set the bones, rebellion. These skills, it was better to learn one more. Who knew when it would come in handy? Old Man Wang knocked on the door and stood at the door. He asked, "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, can I have a word with you?" Shawnee smiled every time she massaged her foot. Li Yi had long wanted to run away from the door. Those who didn't know would think that he was abducting an ignorant girl inside. Li Yi walked into the courtyard and sat beside the stone table. Old Man Wang sat opposite him. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla and the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, Li Emingzu, must be very close, right?" Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang. He didn't know what he meant by this question. He waved his hand and said modestly, "Just so." Old Man Wang looked at him and asked, "Then what does Jiang of Silla think about Princess Duanrong compared to the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom?" Li Yi thought for a while and shook his head regretfully. In terms of appearance at this level, there was actually no difference between them. It could only be said that each had their own merits. Emingzu was the domineering empress type. Although Yang Liuqing was a princess, she was the pretty daughter of a humble family. Their identities were not much different. In terms of martial arts, they were far apart. In terms of breasts, they were not far apart in the past, but now they were far apart. In general, they were still not as good as Emingzu. Old Man Wang seemed to agree with his conclusion and nodded. His eyes were slightly dim as he said, "The eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom is a genius. Your Highness is indeed not as good as her." Li Yi was a little puzzled. For no reason, why did Old Man Wang compare Yang Liuqing and Emingzu? He wasn't as free as him. He still had to boil bone soup for Shawnee to nourish her body. He stood up and said, "Prime Minister Wang, if there is nothing else, I will leave first. The soup is still boiling in the pot." Prime Minister Wang raised his head and suddenly looked at him. His eyes flashed and he asked, "Jiang of Silla, if we want to support Her Highness as the Empress, is there any possibility of success?" Li Yi looked at him and was stunned for a while. Seeing Xiao Huan and Xiao Chui walking into the courtyard, he turned his head and said, "Xiao Huan, go and see if the bone soup in the kitchen is ready. Don't overheat it." Then he said to Xiao Chui, "Go and brew a pot of tea." Prime Minister Wang's train of thought is very strange. Li Yi looked at him and sat down again. He praised, "I admire it very much." Chapter 1070. Pedantic, conservative, conformist, stubborn. This was Li Yi's impression of Geezer Wang. In reality, it wasn't just him. These high-ranking officials and old men all had similar images in his eyes. Only now did he realize that he was wrong, completely wrong. He shouldn't have looked at people with colored glasses, shouldn't have been biased, and shouldn't have used a single point to cover the whole. He had committed the most common mistake in the world. How was this the stubborn old prime minister? This was simply a pioneer with an avant-garde ideology. In the era without the Wu woman, Geezer Wang's ideology was hundreds or even thousands of years ahead of the rest of the world. What kind of ideological realm was this? Li Yi took a sip of tea, looked at him and asked, "If I support Princess Duanrong as the Empress, what will happen to King Jing?" Geezer Wang should have already thought of this problem. Without any thought or hesitation he said, "I will announce to the public that King Jing was ambushed by a traitor sent by Emperor Wu and unfortunately died. That traitor killed his brother and father, and now he even wants to assassinate his own brother. He has lost his virtue and has lost the mandate of heaven. The people of the Wu kingdom should rise up and rebel against the tyranny." To be able to think of even this kind of method, Geezer Wang's image in Li Yi's mind was invisibly raised by another level. "This is a good idea." Li Yi nodded. It was a rebellion after all. The most important thing at the beginning was to find a reason, such as a tyrannical ruler, losing the mandate of heaven, the fall of the emperor's star, the coming of purple chi from the east. With this as an excuse, the rest of the operation would be carried out in a logical manner. Jiang of Silla is a genius who has assisted the Jing kingdom in its resurgence. He is experienced and knowledgeable, so he must be able to see further than this old man. Geezer Wang looked at him and said, "This old man only has one question. Is it possible to support a woman as the empress?" Li put down his teacup and said with a smile, "Prime Minister Wang, have you heard of an old saying?" Geezer Wang looked at him and asked, "What old saying?" "Anything is possible." The old man surnamed Wang thought for a moment and asked, "May I know who said this?" An ancient person with the surname Li once said that everything is possible. Li smiled and said, "This sentence is for Prime Minister Wang." "Anything is possible?" The old man surnamed Wang repeated these words over and over again. After a while, he stood up and bowed respectfully to Li Yi. "Thank you, Jiang of Silla." In the eyes of the world, a woman becoming an empress was undoubtedly a fantasy. Several months ago even he could not accept it. However, too many things had happened in the past few months. First, Imperial Prince Jing had no talent or virtue, which made him thoroughly disappointed. Then the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom took charge of the government and rapidly rose to power, which also caused his mentality to change greatly. The Wu kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom. If he wanted to change the current situation, he had to open up a new path. This path was unprecedented since ancient times. It was the first path since the beginning of the world. He did not know if this path would work until he received confirmation from Jiang of Silla. He came to ask him only to get confirmation. This would be his unwavering direction in the future. "Prime Minister, you're too kind." Li Yi waved his hand and asked with interest, "A woman becoming an empress is something that has never happened in history. Why did Prime Minister Wang suddenly think of supporting Princess Duanrong as the empress? I'm afraid it's not just because Imperial Prince Jing has lost his virtue, right?" The old man surnamed Wang asked in return, "Since the Jing kingdom has an empress, why can't our Wu kingdom have one?" Li Yi said in surprise, "Since when did the Jing kingdom have an empress? Although she doesn't have the title of empress, she is the real empress." The old man surnamed Wang said with certainty, "The Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed and lazy. He is thousands of miles away from the capital city. All the affairs in the court, big or small, are handled by the eldest princess, Li Emingzu. If she isn't the empress, then what is she?" Cough. Li covered his mouth and coughed softly. The old man surnamed Wang waved his sleeve. "The Jing kingdom needs a vice emperor, but the Wu kingdom doesn't need one. We only need to support the eldest princess as the empress. As for the other matters, we'll discuss them after we've cleared out the rebels." Li took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. This time he did not have to cough anymore. Li Xian walked over from behind and put his arm around the old man surnamed Wang's shoulder. He smiled and said, Come and tell me. Tell me why the Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed." "Who did it?" Li Xian had returned half a day earlier. When he found out that Shaning was injured, he was extremely angry. He looked at Li Yi and said angrily, "I've only been gone for a few days and you've already injured Shaning. How did you protect her? How can I be at ease when I hand her over to you in the future?" Li could not refute this matter. Shaning used her other uninjured leg to hop over and said, "Brother, it's not Mister's fault. It's all my fault. Where's the assassin? Who sent him?" Li Xian's anger had not dissipated. How dare he assassinate the Jing kingdom's princess? I'm going to hack him into pieces. The Wu kingdom's emperor. Li looked at him and said, "The assassin was sent by the Wu kingdom's emperor. Why don't you send your troops to wipe out the Wu kingdom? I'll lend you the red barbarian cannon and give you a 20% discount on the new weapons." Li Xian quickly calmed down. The war between the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had just subsided for less than 2 years. They were still at the stage of stabilizing the national economy. It was impossible for them to wipe out the Wu kingdom for no reason. Even if Li Xian agreed, the courtiers would not agree. Li Xian had nowhere to vent his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'll go and see how the old man's writing is going. Meditate and reflect on one's own mistakes. Don't talk about other people's wrongs while chatting." This ancient saying was very good. Don't speak ill of others behind their backs. Because old man Wang spoke ill of Li Xian behind his back, he was taken down by 2 imperial consecrators on the spot. The 2 consecrators were older than him, and there was no such thing as respecting the old and loving the young. Li Xian did not make things difficult for him. He just locked him in his room and made him write a 5,000-word reflection. The content of the reflection was to praise him, saying that he was wise and mighty, indomitable, talented and good-looking, and a famous ruler throughout the ages. Li Yi felt that old man Wang, as the prime minister, should not lack a 5,000-word vocabulary. If Li Xian did not vent his anger on him, it should not be a problem for him to double the number of words. As it turned out, Li Xian did not do things in such a low-end way. He only made old man Wang read what he had written with great emotion. According to an imperial guard who did not want to be named, the old man fell down before he finished half of the content. When he fell down, he vomited and had diarrhea. It was extremely miserable. Li Yi had not seen old man Wang for 3 days, and it had also been 3 days since he saw Yang Fu. In these 3 days, Yang Liuqing did chores such as cleaning the courtyard and drying the clothes as usual. She was more like a servant girl of the Li family than a princess. She never talked much. She just buried herself in her work and had little communication with Rui. Until the morning of the 3rd day, the weather was sunny and the breeze was gentle. Li Yi came out to bask in the sun with Shanning in his arms and played chess with her casually. Rui stood behind him and watched the game. Many times she expressed her disdain for his loss to Shanning. Rui, Ruoqing and 3rd Miss Chen took turns to take Li Mu from Zue Mo's hands and walked around the yard with her in their arms. A little further away, Yang Liuqing was helping Li Duan correct his movements. Under her guidance, Li Duan had been able to play a complete set of boxing. Of course, his fist technique only had the form, it did not have any power. Compared with Shanning, Li Yi's chess skills seemed very bad, or even no chess skills at all. So it made Mississippi Lu have the illusion that she could also beat him. This illusion was completely dispelled after 5 consecutive defeats. On the other side, Yang Liuqing touched Li Duan's head and said, "Well, that's all for today. Go and play." Li Duan cupped his hands to her in a chivalrous manner and ran to the other side to see his sister. Yang Liuqing turned around and saw that her master was blaming Uncle Li Yi for losing the game. The place where Uncle Rui was also warm. She looked at the situation in this small courtyard and couldn't help smiling. For her, there was no place in this world that could compare to this place. She stood in the shadow of the trees, facing a warm and harmonious family. When she turned around, there were only knives, spears, swords, halberds, mountains of corpses and seas of blood. She walked out of the shadow of the trees and into the sun, but it seemed that she had walked into the deeper shadow. She walked to Li Yi and Rui with a smile on her face and said, "Master, Uncle, I'm here to say goodbye to you." Chapter 1071. Mississippi Lu's disciple did not belong here. Li Yi had long known that this day would come. Her injuries had healed a long time ago, and her martial arts had also improved. These days she had never mentioned a certain matter, but it did not mean that she had let it go or forgotten it. In her eyes, there was the great hatred of her parents and brothers, as well as the people of the Wu kingdom. She could let it go for a while, but she could not let it go forever. Mississippi Lu held a chess piece in her hand, and after a moment of silence she asked, "When are you leaving?" Yang Liuqing lowered his head and said, "Tomorrow." Mississippi Lu put down the chess piece and said, "Got it. Master Martial Uncle, I will leave first." She lowered her head and fell silent. After a long time, she said in a low voice and turned to leave. When she reached the gate of the courtyard, her footsteps paused. With this step, she would be in 2 completely different worlds, 2 completely different lives. Unfortunately, she had no other choice. She looked back again, turned her head and strode out. This game of chess was not finished because the players were not in the mood. Li Yi was a bit conflicted. He had never expressed any intention of helping Yang Liuqing. First, it was because what she wanted to do was too important and risky, and it required a great investment of money. If he helped her with all his strength, even he could not afford it. Second, it was because fundamentally speaking he was not helping Yang Liuqing but Yang Fu. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, who was Yang Fu. But now it was different. From a sociological point of view, Yang Fu was already a dead man. He could not appear in front of the people of the Wu kingdom again. For the rest of his life he could only choose to be an ordinary person. And if he was not in a hurry, he did not need to use the red barbarian cannon to blast his way through. He could take the dog head of the emperor of the Wu kingdom within 3 months and take the simple and violent route. In fact, the rebellion could be done slowly. He only needed to provide some strategic support and weapons support to help her mobilize the strength of the people of the Wu kingdom, unite the front and advance step by step. To be honest, it had always been a regret in his heart that Emingzi did not sit on the throne. However, since things had come to this, he could not possibly rebel against Li Xian. Now there was a great opportunity in front of him. If he missed it, it would be a pity. After all, if he missed this opportunity, he wouldn't get another one. Li looked at Mississippi Lu, thought for a moment and said, this is her choice. Mississippi Lu stood up and walked back to her room. Li sighed. He knew that Rui was conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to help her only disciple, but on the other hand, she had to think about everyone else. She would no longer act on impulse or passion. He carried Shanning back to the room, walked out again and sat back in his original position. He pondered for a long time, but still couldn't make a decision. What's wrong? Are your hands itching? Li Xian walked in from outside and sat opposite him. He looked at him and asked with interest. Li glanced at him. What do you mean itching my hands? Stop pretending. Li Xian looked at him and said, I know. Your precious disciple nephew will be leaving tomorrow. Li needed to correct a mistake. Yang Liuqing was Mississippi Lu's precious disciple, and his disciple nephew. There was no need to add any attribution in front of the name, disciple nephew. He looked at Li Xian and said, she has her mission. Do you think that everyone is like you, not doing a proper job and being muddle-headed and lazy in politics? Keep pretending. Li Xian crossed his arms and looked at him as if he had seen through everything. He said, I don't believe that you are not tempted by her. Li looked back. Rui and the others had entered the room, and Mississippi Lu was not outside. He then looked back at Li Xian with a slightly angry expression. Although we are very familiar with each other, don't talk nonsense. Do you think I don't know you? Li Xian waved his hand and said, don't think that I don't know. You wanted Emingzu to be the empress, but that incident happened and the plan failed. I know that you must have regrets in your heart. You want Emingzu to be the empress and you want your second daughter to be the empress. He looked at Li Yi and suddenly asked, tell me honestly, do you have any special fetish? Do you especially like empress, queen and princess, He Emingzu Shanning Yang Liuqing Yongning? You must have this fetish. Li Xian looked at him and continued, this time it was personally suggested by that old man. I don't believe that you will miss this rare opportunity. Slander, naked slander. The reason why he was conflicted was because he did not want his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, to die for nothing. He also did not want Mississippi Lu to fight for Zhong Tian or not. It might become a lifetime of regret in the future. Li Xian, that son of a bitch, what was in his head? Not to mention Emingzu Shanning is still a child. Yang Liuqing is his martial nephew. Yongning is his younger sister, despicable, shameless. Li pointed at him and said angrily, get out of my sight right now. Don't, are you angry because of this? Li Xian shook his head and said, this is not a secret. We still have many spies in the Wu kingdom. If you need them you can call them. Li Duan stood beside Li Yi, pulled his sleeve and asked, Father, where is senior sister going? If the Li family was compared to a sect, then Rui, and him should be the first generation, and now there were also Ruoqing and Zuemo. Yang Liuqing was Rui's disciple, and counted as the second generation. Li Duan and Li Mu, in the future there might be Li Xiao and Li Rong, and their other children were also the second generation. In this generation Yang Liuqing was the eldest. Li Yi patted Li Duan's head gently and said, senior sister is going back to her hometown. Li Duan was a little disappointed when he heard this. Senior sister was gone, and there was one less person to play with him. But even he wanted to go back to the capital and see Xiao Rui. Senior sister had been away from home for so long, and she must be very homesick. Old man Wang got into the carriage early. He was too ashamed to see anyone now, especially Li Xian. At his age he was caught on the spot criticizing others behind their backs, and then he suffered inhuman torture. This would be a stain that this old man could not wash away for the rest of his life. Wei Liang and Qin Qing stood behind Yang Liuqing, looking resolute. There was a kind of rustling wind and cold water, and a strong man who would never return. Yang Liuqing walked to Mississippi Lu, knelt down on both knees and respectfully bowed 3 times. He stood up and said, Master, I'm leaving. Take care of yourself in the future. Li Yi was half a step behind Mississippi Lu. He could clearly see her clenching and unclenching her fists. Yang Liuqing turned and left. After a few steps he suddenly stopped and walked to Li Yi's side. He said, Uncle, I have a few words to say to you in private. Li Yi was startled. He confirmed that she was talking to him and not Mississippi Lu. After glancing at Rui, he turned and walked into the room. Yang Liuqing slowly followed. She looked up at Li Yi and a smile appeared on her face. She said, After thinking about it carefully, there are some words that I still want to tell Uncle before I leave. I'm afraid that if I leave this time I won't have the chance to say it again." Li Yi's lips parted slightly, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. What's going on? He suddenly thought of a ridiculous possibility in his heart, but he quickly erased this thought. This was too ridiculous. At this moment, Yang Liuqing had already begun to speak with a smile. "Actually, Uncle has always been the person I admire the most in my heart." Li Yi secretly cursed in his heart. As expected, he had guessed correctly. Mississippi Lu was standing outside. If she wanted to listen, she could totally hear what he said. However, she was about to leave. Before leaving, Li Yi did not want to hurt her heart anymore. How should he reject her tactfully so that he would not hurt her? Should he tell a white lie? But Rui's limpid eyes would not cut him with a sword out of kindness. "Uncle is very smart. In my heart, you are the smartest person in the world. You have penetrating insight and you take every possibility into account. There is nothing that can baffle you." Li Yi blushed a little as he waved his hand and said, "Not at all. Actually, I am still a little far from what you have said." Yang Liuqing smiled and said, "Uncle doesn't have to be humble. I have seen all the things that you have done all these years." He did not expect that she had secretly been paying attention to him for so long. Li Yi sighed and said, "I understand your intentions, but Uncle is very smart, but in some matters you are very stupid." Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, "Actually, Master and Uncle are very similar. Both of them will not easily speak out their thoughts. However, Uncle is a man. There are some things that cannot wait for a woman to speak first." "Ah?" This turn was a little abrupt. Li Yi did not react in time. "These words cannot be said to Master. I can only say it to Uncle." Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, "From now on, I don't know when we can meet again. I don't know if we can meet again. Uncle, take care." She said this last sentence, turned around and walked out of the room. Li Yi looked at her back and sighed. He said slowly, "You, stop right there." He rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Because of a certain problem, he felt a slight headache. How to launch a successful rebellion in the ancient times. Waiting online. It's urgent. Chapter 1072. Yang Liuqing's footsteps paused, but she did not turn her head. "You are going to die like this." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Isn't it just a rebellion? It's not a big deal. Uncle Master will help you." Yang Liuqing's body trembled slightly. All these years she had only shed tears twice: when her father and brother had been killed, and when her mother had committed suicide, and when she had reunited with her master. She had brought Yang Fu with her when they had been chased by the imperial court. She had not cried when they had been on the run. She had not cried when they had fought their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood when they had been defeated by the imperial court. But at this moment, because of Li Yi's words, she had instantly burst into tears. She wiped her tears, and when she turned her head, her face was already smiling. She shook her head and said, "Uncle Master, I appreciate your kindness, but these are my niece's family matters. Please do not interfere." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Do you know what the first rule of our sect is?" Yang Liuqing shook her head and said in a low voice, "We do not have a sect and we do not have rules." "Now we do." Li Yi looked at her and said, "The first rule of our sect is to be obedient." "Uncle Master." Li Yi gently patted her head as if he was patting Li Duan and said, "Be good, be obedient, Uncle Master. If you do not listen, you will be punished according to the sect rules." She looked at Li Yi's solemn expression, opened her mouth and did not say another word. However, the tears in her eyes that she had been holding back rolled down uncontrollably, sliding down her face. At first it was only one or two, but then it became a string. She squatted on the ground and hugged her knees. Although she was still trying hard to hold back, she could not help but cry out. Li Yi was most afraid of girls crying. When Zumo cried, he could hug her and comfort her gently, but the person in front of him was his martial nephew. When Yang Liuqing cried, he didn't even know where to put his hands. Especially when Mississippi Lu heard the noise and walked into the room. She stood at the door and saw Yang Liuqing squatting on the floor, hugging his knees and crying. When she looked at him again, he didn't know what to do. Yang Liuqing cried for a while before she stopped. She stood up straight, her face slightly red. Li Yi thought of what she had just said and asked curiously, "What did you say just now? What happened between your master and me?" Mississippi Lu glared at him, then at Yang Liuqing and pulled her away. Li Yi was a little confused. He wasn't the one who had made her precious disciple cry. He couldn't help her, but he couldn't help her either. He was in a bad spot. It was normal for girls to be sentimental. There was nothing shameful about crying, not to mention in front of him and Rui. Old man Wang would be greatly embarrassed. Because he didn't want to see anyone, he had long hidden in the carriage, waiting to leave. But now that he was not in a hurry to leave, he had to get off the carriage and walk back under everyone's gaze. Even the servant girls of the Li family knew that the old man beside Miss Yang liked to talk behind people's backs. He was so old that he still pooped his pants. Old man Wang had replaced Yang Fu and become the man of the hour. As early as a few days ago, Yang Fu had been sent to the mountains. He would spend a very long time on one of the mountains in the land of chaos. Qin Qing had personally led people to the Wu kingdom to spread the news that the former emperor's legitimate son, King Jing, had been assassinated by Emperor Wu's men and died early. This just happened to confirm an old saying. Some people were alive but they were already dead. Rebellion had never been a simple thing. Rebellion also had to pay attention to basic laws and core values. Li Yi played it down when he said it, but when he really carried it out, he had to be very careful with every step he took. Fortunately, he had a lot of useful information to search for and countless historical experiences to learn from. He didn't even have to tailor it for them. There were thousands of ways to rebel, and there would always be one that suited them. Moreover, she wasn't rebelling. She was also the legitimate heir of the Wu kingdom. What she wanted to do was to set things right. In fact, compared to Mingzhu, it was even easier for her to ascend to the supreme position. Mingzhu's real identity was a princess, and she was the real princess royal of the Wu kingdom. She had a very high prestige among the people of the Wu kingdom. According to Old Man Wang, they also had some old subordinates of the former dynasty who were deeply hidden in the imperial court. Before the official rebellion, Li Yi naturally had to understand these things first. This time he didn't intend to use too much power. Wang Wei and the others would be enough to manage the fringe well. Other than a few experts, the Lu League didn't need to move into the Wu kingdom on a large scale. Their power was never the deciding factor, and they were also not Yang Liuking's biggest reliance. Historical experience told him that the more ferocious the enemy was and the more difficult the environment was, the more it was necessary to mobilize the power of the people. Uncle Master. A figure came from behind and sat beside him. Yang Liuking was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "Uncle Master, I don't want to take revenge anymore." Li Yi turned to look at her. She thought for a moment and said, "Once we start the rebellion, many people will die, many innocent people." Li Yi knew that deep in her heart she still didn't want to be a burden to him and Rui. But in reality he didn't want to be a burden either. In the face of an army of tens of thousands, their strength was far from enough. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Even if you don't start the rebellion, will there be fewer people dying?" Yang Liuking lowered her head and didn't say anything. The Wu kingdom was now divided by warlords. There were conflicts between the imperial court and the major forces, and between the major forces themselves. The ones who suffered in the middle were the millions of innocent people. As long as this chaos didn't end, the people would suffer one more day, and the number of people who died would increase. She shook her head and said, "I can't be a burden to Master and Uncle Master." Li Yi looked at her and said, "You're Master and I can't help you clear away all the obstacles. You still have to rely on yourself." A smile involuntarily appeared on her face. Even if she only had 500 soldiers under her command, as long as she knew that her Master and Uncle Master were behind her, she still had the confidence of a magnificent army. Yang Liuking nodded and showed a hint of determination on her face. She said, "Thank you, Uncle Master. I definitely won't let Master and Uncle Master down." Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's up to you to rescue the people of the Wu kingdom from the abyss of suffering." Yang Liuking thought for a moment and suddenly asked, "Uncle Master, can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead." Li Yi leaned back on the chair and put his hands behind his head as he said casually, "Uncle Master seems to really want us to rise up and rebel? Really? Ever since the day Prime Minister Wang came to find Uncle Master, I felt it. Before that, I knew Uncle Master didn't want me to take revenge. It must be a misconception." Li Yi saw that she was looking at him. He looked around and saw Shanning, who had one leg wrapped and was sitting on the swing with Yongning. He thought for a moment and said, "If Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, you wouldn't have escaped to Shuzhou. If you hadn't escaped to Shuzhou, he wouldn't have sent people to kill you. If he hadn't sent people to kill you, Shanning wouldn't have attacked that assassin. If Shanning didn't attack that assassin, she wouldn't have sprained her ankle." Yang Liuking looked at him with a trace of doubt on her face. "So, if Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, Shanning wouldn't have sprained her ankle." Li Yi looked at Shanning, who was not far away, and explained, "She's my disciple. If I don't avenge her ankle, I won't be able to take it lying down. He then looked at Yang Liuqing and said, so, you have to work hard to end the situation of the Wu Kingdom's clique. Take back the country that the traitor stole from you. If Yang Fu can't help him, you can become the emperor yourself. Govern the Wu Kingdom well and return peace to the people. Yang Liuqing still didn't understand why they wanted to rebel when Shanning sprained her ankle. The expression on his face became even more doubtful. Forget it, these are not important. Li Yi waved his hand and said, in short, you have to remember to take back your father's country and become the emperor yourself. Chapter 1073. From the bottom of his heart, Li Yi actually did not want to persuade someone to be an emperor. This was the minister appointed by the late emperor of Wu Kingdom to entrust the orphan to him. He was the former prime minister, Old Wang. Through the deeds of the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom in charge of politics, and coincidentally, he met the emperor of the Jing Kingdom in Shuzhou, who looked the least like an emperor. After suffering a double blow both mentally and physically, he brainstormed for a while before coming up with this unprecedented idea that would shock the heavens and the earth and make the gods cry. Li Yi could swear to God that he had no part in this process. What was more coincidental was that it was Yang Liuqing who wanted to overthrow the tyranny of the Wu Kingdom, establish a new regime, and liberate the poor people of the Wu Kingdom. Who was Yang Liuqing? He was Mississippi Lu's disciple, the only disciple, and his blood relative. Who was Mississippi Lu? She was Lu Rui, his sister-in-law, the only sister-in-law, and his blood relative. He and Rui were of the same generation, so Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, the only martial nephew, and his blood relative. Could he just watch as his own disciple sent himself to his death, and cause Rui to sink into pain and sorrow every time she thought of her disciple? Obviously not. Moreover, Shanning had sprained her ankle, and he had to take revenge. Li Yi decided to go back to his room and take out the proposal that he had been saving up for a while to refer to it. It was originally tailor-made for Emingzu, but due to various reasons, it could only be put aside permanently. Li Yi had thought that he would never need it again in this life, but he did not expect that it could be put to use so soon. Although Emingzu and Yang Liuqing had the same ultimate goal, they had different starting points, different circumstances, and completely different paths to take. One was a gentle replacement, while the other was a violent revolution. However, there were some similarities between them. It was a pity that Emingzu did not come this time. Otherwise, she could have exchanged insights with Yang Liuqing. After all, she was his senior. Speaking of Emingzu, he really missed her. He didn't know if she had gained weight or lost weight. He also didn't know if she drank soup often. He also didn't know if she missed him and his egg-fried rice. Li Yi sighed. In fact, he should go back to the capital to have a look. But Li Mu was only a few months old and couldn't stand the long journey. What's more, he had something important to do soon. After being idle for so long, his hands were really itching. The blood in his chest that had been cold for a long time seemed to have a tendency to heat up again. Which area should he start from? While Li Yi was deep in thought, a figure walked past him. He raised his head, thought for a moment, then waved his hand and said, Su Zheng, come here for a moment. Li Xian was very regretful. He really wanted to see how Yang Liuqing would rebel. If possible, he even wanted to participate personally and fire the first shot of the revolutionary uprising. But they had stayed in Shuzhou for a few months. It had been more than half a year since he left the capital. There had never been an emperor like him. Many courtiers had already expressed strong dissatisfaction with this. There had also been a certain degree of instability in the capital. Moreover, he couldn't abandon his wife and children to wander outside. They were going back. Li Yi carried Shanning on his back and walked on the street. Her feet hadn't fully recovered, and it was inconvenient for her to walk with a cane. So during this period of time, Li Yi was her legs. Shuzhou should have become the largest commodity trading center in the Jing Kingdom and even in the surrounding countries. In a small Yong county, they could buy the specialties of each country. They were going to leave tomorrow. Li Yi specially took her out to buy things today. Just the number of guards following behind to take the items was already more than 10. Bai Su followed by his side. She was Shanning's personal bodyguard. These days she was inseparable from her, so naturally she was inseparable from Li Yi. Luckily, the enmity and grudges between them had already vanished into thin air along with that piece of secret prescription. This young Miss Bai's attitude towards him was much better, and occasionally she would even smile at him, which made Li Yi feel overwhelmed by the favor. He even felt that Bai Su's previous sexual orientation was different from other women because she felt too inferior in some areas, so she had a rebellious mentality. Because her foundation was too weak, she could have obvious results in a short period of time. This directly caused her confidence to soar. Perhaps she could reverse this mentality. From the bottom of his heart, he still hoped that Bai Su could be a normal woman. It was good to be a woman. Shanning was a little quiet today. She lay on his back without saying a word. She was completely different from the past when she always had endless things to say. She didn't say a word, as if she had something on her mind. Whenever she was unhappy, Li Yi would always try his best to make her happy. However, today was different. She could stay here for another month or two in a self-harming way, but no more. A woman walked past them with a child. The child, who was about 4 or 5 years old, looked at the rows of sugar figurines on the street. He tugged at the woman's sleeve and asked, "Mother, what are these?" The woman looked back and said with a smile, "These are sugar figurines." The child looked at the sugar figurines in the shape of animals. His throat moved and he asked, "Can these sugar figurines be eaten?" The woman smiled and walked forward to ask the old man blowing the sugar figurines, "Old man, can these sugar figurines be eaten?" Seeing his mother walk to the stall, the child's face lit up with joy. His eyes seemed to be shining. When the old man saw that there was a customer, he immediately nodded and said, "Yes. Madam, how many do you want?" "It's only 2 copper coins each." The woman turned back and stroked the child's head. She said, "Did you hear that? Grandpa said it can be." With that said, she held the child's hand and disappeared into the vast crowd. Shanning, who was lying on Li Yi's back, finally laughed. "Ah, sir, did you see that? That child was almost crying when he left." She wrapped her arms around Li Yi's neck and said, "Sir, I want to eat sugar figurines." She still remembered that the day before her husband left 2 years ago, he had bought her a lot of sugar figurines. She had not eaten them since then. Later, the old man who sold sugar figurines in the capital passed away. This was the first time she had seen sugar figurines since then. When Li Yi walked over, the old man got up from his chair and asked, "Sir, do you want sugar figurines? Do you want to blow them or draw them?" "The blowing ones are 5 copper coins and the drawing ones are 2 copper coins." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, "Can I blow one myself?" The sugar figurines that Shanning and the rest had eaten in the past were all drawn. This kind of sugar figurine was usually used to eat. It was more difficult to blow a sugar figurine, but the shape was 3-dimensional and more aesthetically pleasing. The old man smiled and said, "Sir, don't underestimate these little sugar figurines. Even the simplest shape is not something that ordinary people can blow. Without years or decades of practice, you can't blow it well." Li Yi smiled and did not say anything. Although his library did not have much of a presence, it had never dropped the ball at critical moments. To think that he knew about astronomy, geography, elliptic hyperbola, hybrid biosphere, satellites in the sky and submarines in the sea. How could a mere sugar figurine stump him? Although there was no book that taught him how to blow a sugar figurine, it was ultimately an art. Just like calligraphy and painting, they were different routes to the same goal. With the addition of body and breath control, how could a dignified expert on the heaven list not be able to do these? Under the old man's doubtful gaze, he washed his hands, took out a small piece of sugar paste, and skillfully pulled out a candy stick. At this moment, the old man's eyes were already filled with surprise. Shanning's eyes also lit up. As he blew, he pinched the sugar figurine with his hands. Soon, a simple figure appeared in his hands. The surprise in the old man's eyes had already turned into shock. The difficulty of blowing a person and blowing an animal were worlds apart. If he had not been immersed in this for decades, it would be impossible for him to be so proficient. Even if this young man had started practicing since he was in his mother's womb, it would still be impossible. This. He looked at the young man's rapidly changing hand gestures, and his body suddenly trembled. He suddenly looked at the girl on his back and cried out involuntarily, This is incredible, incredible." Although it was just a sugar figurine, from the sugar figurine's figure, hairstyle and slightly blurred eyebrows, it could be seen at a glance that the person he was blowing was the girl on his back. In addition to being shocked, the old man suddenly became vigilant. If the young people nowadays were all so powerful, his rice bowl would be ruined, sir. Shanning hugged Li Yi's neck tightly, her face full of a blissful smile. "Cough, be gentle, I can't breathe." Li Yi stuck the sugar figurine on a bamboo stick and handed it to her, saying, "This is for you." Bai Su looked at the happy and satisfied girl, and then looked at Li Yi. She finally understood why there were so many mistresses in the imperial residence. She did not know how many women he had tricked with this method. For a young girl like her who had not seen the world, this kind of trick was the most attractive. Even the chief that she admired the most was tricked by him using some unknown method. And Senior Rui was a grandmaster, and he could even trick a grandmaster. She must be more careful in the future. Beast? She looked at the beautiful girl on his back and the lifelike sugar figurine in her hands. She secretly spat in her heart, if you have the ability, blow one for her too. Chapter 1074. After blowing a candy figure for Shanning, Li noticed that Bai Su was looking at him strangely. It was as if she was looking at a beast. He thought to himself, even if her breasts become bigger in the future, she will still be as narrow-minded as before. It's just that I gave it to Shanning and not her, so he blew another candy figure for her. It was a big-breasted woman with the same beautiful meaning and blessing. When the old man who sold the candy figure found out that Li Yi was not in the same trade as the one who blew the candy figure, he was obviously in high spirits. He insisted that he did not take his money. It was only a few copper coins, so Li Yi did not insist. Shanning held the candy figure in her hand. She could not bear to eat it until they returned home. Bai Su could not bear to eat it either. She looked at the candy figure in her hand enviously. Li Yi placed Shanning on the bed in the room and asked, "What do you want to eat today? I will make it for you." She counted with her fingers and said, "I want to eat spicy prawns, steamed fish, braised pork ribs and sir's soup." Tomorrow she and Li Xian would set off for the capital. Before that, Li Yi would fulfill all her requests. When Li Yi walked out of the room, Shanning sat on the bed for a while before jumping off. She put on her shoes and looked around the room. After a while, she found a brocade box and carefully placed the candy figure in it. Bai Su stood outside the door and looked at the candy figure in her hand for a long time. A trace of jealousy appeared on her face. She bit off the candy figure's breast. "I will be back," said Li Xian solemnly as he stood at the entrance of the prince's mansion. The Fringe was a good place, especially the secret base that Li Yi had built there. In the past, the place he wanted to stay the most was the Academy of Sciences. But now, the Academy of Sciences was second to him. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Where is Shanning?" Bai Su replied, "In the room." Li Xian sighed and said, "If only she could stay for a few more months." Li Yi looked at his legs and Li Xian felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine, and he shivered. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "You guys go first. Wait at the city gate. I will bring her there in a while." In the room, Shanning's foot was still wrapped in white gauze. When she saw Li Yi, she said in a low voice, "Sir." Li Yi walked to the bed and squatted with his back to her. He said, "They have gone first. I will carry you to the city gate." "Wait a minute, I still have something to bring." Knowing that Mr. would carry her to the city gate, Xu Ning seemed a little happy. She hurriedly jumped off the bed, ran to the cabinet barefooted and took out a small box. "Wait a moment, I still have something to bring." Knowing that her teacher would carry her to the city gate, Shanning was clearly happy. She quickly jumped off the bed and ran barefoot to the side of the cupboard. She took out a small box. Li Yi pretended not to see it and she pretended not to see it. Li Yi pretended not to see it. Holding the box, she ran over, put on her shoes and lay on his back. The sloppy old man glanced at her. "Little girl, you don't have eyes." Bai Su lowered her head and didn't say anything. She and Jiang of Silla could still bicker and glare at each other, but she didn't dare to get angry at the old man in front of her. Because Jiang of Silla couldn't beat her, and even 10 of her couldn't beat this old man. Shanning's personality was lively. In the past, she would always be like a little bird chirping around him. Now that she had grown up, she always spoke softly, but she still had endless things to say. She couldn't wait to tell her all the interesting things that happened in the capital after Li Yi left the capital. For example, Li Han, who all the civil and military officials wanted to have a good relationship with, was always despised by a little girl, Duan Wu. He even used his position as the dean and threatened not to graduate to force a student from the Mathematics Institute to pass on information for him. It was all because the student's sister was Duan Wu's good friend. There was also a certain important official in the court who couldn't stand his fierce wife at home. He went to the women's union to report that his fierce wife often used violence against him. She and Li Yi had been talking about such interesting things for a few months, but there was no end to it. No matter how long the road was, there would always be an end. Li Yi didn't know how many streets and alleys he had gone through, but at some point he arrived at the city gate. "Teacher." Shanning suddenly said. "Yes." Li Yi habitually tilted his head slightly so that he could hear more clearly. The young girl's soft lips pressed against the side of his face. Shanning jumped down from his back and waved at him. Her pretty face was full of smiles. "Goodbye, teacher." She ran into the city gate and looked back every 3 steps. Li Yi personally sent the caravan of nearly 100 people out of the city. The girl who had been waving at him for a long time on the carriage at the very front had already disappeared. He stood in place and watched for a long time until he could not even see the last shadow of the figure. Yongning stood beside him and held his hand. She asked, "Brother, when will royal sister come to see us again?" Li thought for a while and said, "Maybe next year." Yongning smiled and said, "Next year I'll be 10 years old next year. Royal sister said that when I turn 10 she'll give me a big present." Li held her hand and walked into the city gate. When they walked into the city, Li looked at the hot sun above his head and said, "Cindy, go back and pack your things. Tomorrow we'll be moving to the mountains. Okay? The young girl seemed very happy. Her voice was clear. Fang said that next time he'll bring me and Dwayner to the mountains to hunt rabbits. Wu Kingdom, imperial capital, inside the palace walls. The hot sun roasted the ground and waves of heat hit. A eunuch ran through the palace gate. When he ran to a certain hall, he was already drenched in sweat. He didn't have time to wipe the sweat off his face or tidy up his clothes. He walked to the door of the hall and pushed it open. He stood respectfully in the hall and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from Sangzhou." In the hall, other than the young man sitting at the top, there were a few other people. A man in green cupped his fists and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 3 months, 3 more provinces in the northwest have rebelled. However, they aren't very strong. General Qing has already led the army to suppress them. We should be able to receive good news soon." The young man nodded and looked at the eunuch. He asked, "What's the matter?" The eunuch knelt on the ground and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from Sangzhou. Said that His Highness King Jing was assassinated a month ago. He has died." The young man clenched and relaxed his fists. He asked with a sullen face, "What did you say? King Jing was assassinated?" "It's news from Sangzhou. Everyone in Sangzhou knows about King Jing's death. Investigate." The young man's face was as dark as water. He said coldly, "Investigate this thoroughly. Arrest the villain who assassinated King Jing. I want to execute his 9 generations. 10 generations. Pringyong, I'll leave this matter to you. Don't come back to see me if you don't catch him." "Yes." The general in green immediately cupped his fists and slowly retreated. When only the young man was left in the hall, he slowly sat down and a smile appeared on his face. He turned around and a withered hand clutched his neck. Granduncle. He was lifted up by the neck. His face was red and he said with difficulty, "You." Opposite him, an old man looked at him with bloodshot eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "****. Do you still have any humanity?" His hand tightened slightly, and the young man's face became even redder. After an unknown amount of time, he released his hand and suddenly flung it. The young man fell to the ground, clutching his neck and gasping for breath. The old man looked at him and did not hide the murderous intent in his eyes. He said gloomily, "If you hadn't massacred all the members of the Yang imperial family, and only the 2 of us are left, I would have sent you to see your father today." The young man clutched his neck and suddenly laughed. He said, "So what if I massacred them? Isn't there still granduncle? If you kill me you can become the emperor yourself. You're just afraid that you're too old to have a son and leave the Yang imperial family without a successor." The old man kicked him, and the young man's body moved several feet horizontally in the hall. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but his face was full of a crazy smile. "Lunatic, you lunatic." The old man looked at him and said angrily, "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Of course you don't dare." The young man supported himself against a pillar and slowly stood up. He asked mockingly, "Other than you and me, there are no males in the Yang imperial family. If you kill me, who will become the emperor, my poor sister?" Chapter 1075. Greetings, elder ancestor. 2 eunuchs stood at the entrance of the hall. When they saw a figure in gray walking out, they immediately knelt on the ground. The old man did not even look at the 2 eunuchs and quickly left. The 2 eunuchs looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. How could they not have heard the commotion in the hall just now? However, among the 2 people in the hall, one was the current emperor, and the other was the most revered elder ancestor of the royal family. A battle of this level was far from what they could participate in. When the elder ancestor was young, he was the most famous prince in the Wu kingdom. He had once personally led an army and won a war that almost overturned the Wu kingdom. After that, he quickly quelled a few rebellions in the country and captured countless people's hearts. However, just when he had won the hearts of the people and the court officials, and was only one step away from ascending to the throne, he inexplicably went to pursue some illusory martial path and left the imperial capital. There was no news of him for 20 years. At that time the emperor was already beyond cure. Before he passed away, he searched everywhere for the elder ancestor, but to no avail. In desperation, he could only pass the throne to his younger brother. More than 10 years later, a prince who held great power forced the emperor to abdicate and rebel. His army had already fought their way to the outskirts of the imperial capital. He was only one step away from making the emperor pass the throne. However, on the last day of the 3-day limit that the prince set for the court officials and the royal family, his own head was hung on the palace wall. In one night, more than 10 generals who had participated in the rebellion were all killed, and their heads were separated from their bodies. The elder ancestor had quelled the rebellion single-handedly. From then on, he had become a legend in the hearts of the people of the Wu kingdom and the court officials. He was also the greatest glory of the royal family. It was said that he had already climbed to the peak of martial path. His martial arts cultivation was superb, and it was difficult to find a match in the world. In the royal family, he had the highest seniority, the most respected position, and the greatest influence. Even the emperors of the past dynasties had to be respectful to him. It was a pity that there were not many people left in the royal family of the Wu kingdom now. After His Majesty ascended to the throne, blood flowed like a river in the capital. Those who were uprooted were not only the ministers who accused him of plotting to usurp the throne, but also all the men of the royal family. They were all killed by him for various reasons. Every time they thought of this matter, they would feel a chill down their spines. The door to the hall was slowly pushed open. The young man wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and brushed off the footprints on his chest. He held his chest and walked out with great difficulty. The expressions of the 2 eunuchs changed, and they immediately went forward. Your Majesty, what's wrong? Imperial physician, quickly summon the imperial physician. The young man waved his hand and said, Let the head of the internal guards come and see me. Yes. The eunuch responded and left quickly. The internal guards belonged to the emperor alone. Other than being responsible for the safety of the imperial city, they also controlled the matters of the imperial capital and even the entire Wu kingdom. They were a sharp sword hanging over the heads of all high officials and nobles. The young man walked back into the hall and slowly walked to the top and sat down. He clenched his fists tightly, and his face was as gloomy as water. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and muttered, Grandmaster, Imperial Uncle, I am the Emperor of the Wu Kingdom. You are old, very old, so old that you can die. Not long after, an old eunuch pushed open the door and walked to the young man's side. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, what are your orders? The young man looked at him, narrowed his eyes and asked, Is Yang Fu really dead? The eunuch said in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty, although no one has come to claim the reward, the news of King Jing's death has already spread to several prefectures, including Cangzhou. In a few days the entire Wu kingdom will know about it. At that time, even if he is not dead, there is no difference from being dead. He cupped his hands respectfully. Congratulations, Your Majesty. With King Jing's death, no one will be able to pose any threat to Your Majesty. The young man pondered for a moment and said slowly, If he is alive, I want to see him. If he is dead, I want to see his corpse. Think of a way to contact those spies. Yes, Your Majesty, the eunuch answered. The young man looked at the eunuch and asked, You are only one step away from becoming a grandmaster, so you must know a lot about martial arts. Grandmasters can never be defeated, right? The eunuch shook his head and said, Grandmasters are not immortals. No matter how good their martial arts are, they are only one person. They can't fight against thousands of troops and horses. If thousands of troops and horses can be used, do I need to ask you? The eunuch shivered and immediately said, Apart from that, only a grandmaster can defeat a grandmaster. Hidden weapons and poisons are just insignificant tricks to them. The young man clenched his fists and said in a deep voice, Help me recruit a grandmaster at all costs. The eunuch was stunned and said, Your Majesty, most grandmasters are indifferent. They come and go without a trace. The young man looked at him and asked, You mean you can't do this? The old eunuch trembled. He cupped his fists and said, Please rest assured, Your Majesty. The young man returned to his seat and looked at the empty hall. He murmured, The Wu kingdom only needs an emperor. It doesn't need an ancestor. The fringe had long been built into a stable base by Li Yi. After clearing out the bandits, the first thing he needed to do was to roll up his sleeves and work hard to focus on the construction. Up until now, the several mountains around the stockade village had all been renovated. There was a slide down the mountain, and the road up the mountain was also made of cement. After the dozens of mountains in the vicinity were surrounded, a city was formed. It was called the city of Rui. At first, Li Yi wanted to name the city after himself. Unfortunately, his name was not as nice as Rui's. The title of Wulin Chancellor and King of Bandits was Rui, not him. He had no choice but to give up. The headquarters of the Lu League had long been moved to the city of Rui. They occupied a mountain alone. After mixing up the bandits they had subdued, there were more than 20,000 of them. These people were in charge of the defense of the entire fringe. They were in charge of the defense of the entire land of chaos. With the cooperation of a few thousand people in the land of chaos, which was easy to defend but hard to attack, with the advantage of the terrain and sharp weapons, even the army of the Wu kingdom would not be able to break in. Of course, these were the forces of the city of Rui. Li Yi did not intend to use these people to help Yang Liuqing attack the city. They would not be of much use outside. Every summer, when the weather was the hottest, it was a good choice to come to Rui to escape the heat. Rui had nothing to do, so she taught a few disciples. Drunk Ink had been idle for a long time, so she could not help but start designing clothes. Of course, this included brassiere. This time, Li Yi had a reason to openly admire and help her come up with strategies. Ruoqing was actually the busiest. Although she had put aside the matters of the brothel, she had an even more important mission. In the near future, there were countless people in the Wu kingdom who were in dire straits waiting to bathe in the radiance of the Empress. In the far future, there were hundreds of thousands of lost believers in the Qi kingdom who were waiting for her to guide them. One advised people to be kind and charitable, while the other advised people to be evil and rebel. It was clear which concubine was real and which one was fake. Yang Liuqing stayed here for the time being because Li Yi's Empress plan had not been completed. He had to stay here to accompany his wife and child. He could only write down the things she wanted to do in detail on a piece of paper. Of course, he could not be bookish. He would not limit their actions to such a small book. From the Zhangzhou of the Wu kingdom to here, there was an extremely smooth road. The speed of information transmission was extremely fast. It could be reached in a day and new strategies could be formulated at any time. Li Yi wrote a part of the plan and walked out to take a breath of fresh air. He saw Su leaning against a big tree, with a chicken drumstick in one hand and wine in the other. He took a bite of the chicken and drank a mouthful of wine. He still looked so sloppy, but there was a faint sense of elegance. He had the temperament of a qigong. This was the demeanor of a different grandmaster. Especially when paired with the melancholy and hesitation that appeared in his eyes, Li Yi could almost be sure that this was an old man with a story. The imperial palace of the Wu kingdom. The emperor of the Wu kingdom looked at an old woman in the hall and slowly said, "As long as you help me with this matter, I will agree to any of your requests." The old woman had a head of white hair, but there were not many wrinkles on her face. Her body was not stooped at all. She looked at the young man in front of her, her expression as calm as an ancient well. "You are the emperor?" The young man was startled, then smiled and said, "Besides the emperor, who else dares to call himself emperor? I can agree to your request." The old woman looked at him and said, "But before that, you must help me find someone." Oh. The old woman narrowed her eyes. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepened. She slowly opened her mouth and her voice was cold, making people feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. "Su Tian." Chapter 1076. Cough cough. When Li Yi saw that Su picked up the wine pot and gulped it down, he knew that he might have choked because he had eaten too much chicken. The one who loved to eat chicken was second granduncle. In order to satisfy his craving for good food, there were 5 cooks in the family who specially made chicken for him. There were a variety of methods, including dozens of methods and over a dozen cuisines. Occasionally they would even create new methods. Su didn't like to eat chicken in the past. He loved white rabbit creamy candies. However, he couldn't stand eating too much sugar when he was old, so he started to imitate second great uncle. Li Yi knew that Su was actually from the Wu kingdom. For most masters, those mundane things could no longer pique their interest. They pursued higher martial arts. Most of them would choose to travel around in search of opportunities to break through again. Of course, Su's opportunities were not outside but here. Li Yi walked over and sat opposite him. He asked, "White Rabbit Creamy Candies have released a new type of milk candy with low sugar content. It won't spoil your teeth. Su, do you want to try it?" The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head. He said, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" It was great to talk to such a straightforward person. He was straightforward and didn't beat around the bush. Li Yi thought about it and said, Su is also from the Wu Kingdom. I don't think you want to see the people of the Wu Kingdom suffer from war and live in misery. I'm not going. The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and said even more straightforwardly. Li Yi was stunned. I haven't said what it is. You want me to protect that little girl? The sloppy old man looked at him and said, I'm not going to the Wu Kingdom. It wasn't good to talk to such a straightforward person at all. The sloppy old man stood up and said, with your second young mistress and the experts on the heaven list, even a master won't be able to do anything. Moreover, the only master left in the Wu Kingdom is Yang Wanli. He's also a member of the Yang royal family. He won't do anything to that little girl. Li Yi originally thought that there was nothing to worry about in the fringe with Rui and second great-uncle by his side. There were also many guards outside. Yang Liuking's trip back to the Wu Kingdom was fraught with danger. With a master by his side, he didn't have to worry too much about his safety. However, since Elder Su said so, he did not insist. After all, Elder Su was a guest, not a servant of the Li family. He thought for a while and asked curiously, could it be that the Wu Kingdom only has two grandmasters, Elder Su and Yang Wanli? 2. The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, 3, isn't there another one here? That's even more impossible. Anyway, don't worry, there aren't that many idle grandmasters in the Wu nation. The sloppy old man seemed to be very unwilling to talk about this topic. After saying that, his figure quickly disappeared. Li Yi looked at the old man's back and shook his head. Perhaps he was really thinking too much. At first glance, Rui's second great-uncle, Su Chang, the Taoist priest with the surname Yuan, and the Taoist nun in the Qi Kingdom were all masters. It seemed like masters were everywhere. But when he thought about it carefully, he didn't seem to have heard of any other masters besides them. He stretched his body and walked back to his room to finish writing the unfinished plan. Yang Liuking knocked on the door and walked in. Uncle, you were looking for me? Li Yi nodded and took out a book from the drawer. He handed it to her and said, keep this. It will be of great use in the future. Yang Liuking took it and looked at it. She was stunned and looked at him. Uncle, this? Li Yi pointed at the book Rebellion, What You Need to Know, and said, this book is a general program and also a basic introduction. You can read it after you go down and see if you can understand it. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me. As for the next step of the plan, you can modify it according to the actual situation. Sorry, I took the wrong book. He saw the cover of the book and was stunned. He immediately took back the book Queen Training Plan from Yang Liuking and put it back into the drawer. He handed the book Rebellion, What You Need to Know to her and said, this is the book. Read it carefully these few days. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first. When he reached the door, he paused and said, from now on, you have to be extremely careful with every step you take. It's time to get rid of those spies among your people. Other than the two guards by Yang Fu's side, Li Yi believed that there were still many spies planted by the martial emperor's side. The existence of these people would always be a threat, and as for how to identify and deal with them, he believed that they had their own methods. Both Wei Liang and Qin Qin came from the military, and each of them had a group of absolutely loyal personal guards who had gone through fire and water with them. It was impossible for them to be disloyal. First, these people were eliminated. There were still a few dozen of them left in the fringe. They were all left in a mountain. They did not have to worry about food and clothing here, but it was impossible for them to send any news out. Whether there were spies among them or not, it wouldn't matter anymore after a few years. After this round of cleansing, they had less than 500 soldiers. Including the first batch of people arranged by Lu Meng, they only had a little more than 600. However, their combat strength couldn't be simply measured by the number of people they had. Not to mention that some of them were experts who could fight against 10 or even dozens of experts. Even with Divine Punishment's excellent equipment, it was enough to easily deal with the elite troops of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, they had only a few people they could use to begin with. If they wanted to turn the situation around with such a small number of people, only fools would go head-on against the army of the Wu Kingdom. Yang Liuking and the others probably still needed some time to prepare. When the first step of the plan was formulated, they would walk out of the fringe and take the first step of the revolution. Originally, he wanted to discuss with Drunken Mo about a few trendy underwear styles, but Old Man Wang came looking for him. They could only slowly talk about the underwear at night. Li Yi admired Old Man Wang very much. He was avant-garde and bold. Although he was old, he wasn't pedantic at all. This was very rare in the current era. Moreover, in the future revolution, as the former prime minister and the role model of the literati of the Wu kingdom, Old Man Wang would play a very big role. Rui and Yang Liuqing were both martial artists. It was very easy for them to carry a knife and kill people. However, if they were to talk about unifying their thinking, the united front, how to fight the land war well, how to establish and govern a base after a great victory, not only would they have a headache, but Li Yi himself would also have a headache. Professional things should be done by professionals. These days, after Jiang of Silla's explanation, I'm suddenly enlightened. After Old Man Wang walked in, he first bowed to Li Yi. In fact, it was more than a sudden enlightenment. After talking with Li Yi for the past few days, he finally understood that there was so much to learn about rebelling. Many aspects of it were similar to governing a country through different means. He had long heard that Jiang of Silla was the best in the world and was also a famous minister in the Jing kingdom in the past. He always thought that the rumors were exaggerated. Today, after experiencing it personally, he understood that those rumors were actually not true. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Prime Minister Wang, is there a problem today? Old Man Wang nodded and said, Jiang of Silla should also know that the traitor who usurped the throne was insane. After killing his brother and father, he was still worried that there would be others who would threaten his throne, so he slaughtered the Yang clan with groundless charges. Li Yi nodded. He had also heard of what Emperor Wu had done. This was not only insane, it was practically antisocial and anti-human. No one would do such a thing. In this way, other than that traitor, there are no more males in the Yang clan. After Her Royal Highness ascends the throne, that traitor will definitely not be able to escape death. A trace of worry appeared on Old Man Wang's face and he said, But after Her Royal Highness, who should this vast world be handed over to? Li Yi understood Old Man Wang's worry very well. For example, the Jing kingdom belonged to the Li family. It was fine for Li Xian or Li Han to sit, but Li Yi himself could not sit. Emperor Wu had killed all the males in the Yang clan. In the future, Empress Yang Liuqing would be bored, so she could not casually choose someone with the surname Yang to pass the throne to. Actually, what Old Man Wang said was wrong. Didn't the Yang clan still have Yang Fu? Forget it, Old Man Wang already thought he was dead. He respected the dead, so he would not mention it. However, on this matter, the Empress in the other world had already given an answer. Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang and said, What's so difficult about this? When your princess has children in the future, just pass it to her son. What flows in his body is still half Yang clan's blood, no? This was a very easy problem to solve. Let Yang Liuqing's son have the surname Yang, and then inherit the throne. Old Man Wang's thoughts were still limited, but it was already not easy for him to think of the Empress. This couldn't be circumvented, and Li Yi could understand. Although Yang Liuqing's child in terms of bloodline could not be compared to the orthodox Yang clan's royal family, if she became the Empress, this wouldn't be a problem. In the other world, there was still someone who wanted to pass the throne to his nephew. Old Man Wang came to a sudden realization and clasped his hands, saying, Thank you, Jiang of Silla, for dispelling my doubts. I thank you on behalf of the people of the Wu kingdom. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hands again. The child born by Yang Liuqing would inherit the Wu kingdom, so what was there to thank him for? He couldn't help her give birth to a son. Chapter 1077. Although Li Yi was her martial uncle, as a martial uncle, he could help Yang Liuqing rebel, but he couldn't help her give birth to a son. He only cared about how Yang Liuqing would ascend the throne, avenge her father and brother, and realize his long-cherished wish. As for who she would pass the throne to after she became the Empress, it was not something he, as a martial uncle, needed to worry about. Old Man Wang came with doubts and confusion. After Li Yi's guidance, he left with a happy face. After a while, Wei Liang and Qin Qing came again. For this martial nephew, Li Yi really worried a lot. Not only did he have to help her make a plan, but he also had to help her subordinates improve their ideological level. Wei Liang and Qin Qing were both former border generals, but guarding the border was different from rebelling. Li Yi needed to teach them how to start the first war, how to improve the military system, including how to expand the organization, how to do a good job in the United Front, and how to create a wave. Li Yi had always advocated that special people be used for special purposes, and the ideological work was handed over to Old Man Wang. He was very reassured. How to make nursery rhymes, how to stuff silk into a fish's stomach, how to write persuasion forms, he was definitely a professional. And Wei Liang and Qin Qing, their responsibilities were actually more important. How to develop their camp from 500 people to 50,000 people, how to fight every battle, how to defend every city, how to help the Empress clear all the obstacles along the way. Such a heavy burden would be on their shoulders. Unknowingly they had talked for more than 2 hours. Li Yi waved his hand tiredly and said, "Let's stop here for today." When the two left, they bowed deeply to him. These days what they learned from Jiang of Silla was enough to use for a lifetime. Li Yi leaned against the back of the chair, closed his eyes and rested for a while. Although he was a little tired, it was worth it. Not to mention that he did all this to help his martial nephew, but also to satisfy some kind of complex in his heart. Moreover, Rui had become much gentler to him these days. Was all worth it? He leaned against the chair. After an unknown amount of time, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders and began to gently press down. It was not Rui, Xiaohuan or Ruoqing or any of them, only Rui would use such a jerky technique. He was in a dilemma. On one hand he hoped that Rui would continue to be gentle, but on the other hand he hoped that she would return to her original self. She was becoming less and less like herself. If she deliberately suppressed it, would she be unhappy? Of course, it was only out of concern for Rui, and not because he had some weird fetish or awakened some attribute that he shouldn't have awakened. At some point, Rui's hand on his shoulder paused and said, "Thank you." "Thank me for what?" Li opened his eyes and asked in confusion. "Thank you for being willing to help her." "I'm helping her, why are you thanking me?" Mississippi Lu did not answer. Li thought about it and waved his hand. He said, "Actually, it's not as complicated as you think. Think about it, if your disciple becomes the Empress, you will be the Empress's teacher, and I will be the Empress's martial uncle. My seniority will be higher than the Empress's, and it will be so prestigious." Mississippi Lu paused and asked, "You're doing this for this? What else could it be?" Li shook his head and said, "Besides, if she becomes the Empress, you will be the Empress's teacher. At that time, even if Emingzu really becomes the Empress, won't you still be better than her?" Mississippi Lu frowned and said, "Even without this matter, I will still be better than her." There was no need for a family to be so calculative. Li naturally would not mention that she had lost to Mingzhu in a duel. He shook his head and said, "Aren't I just adding flowers to brocade?" Mississippi Lu seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Since you helped Yang Liuqing to ascend the throne because you want to be the Empress's martial uncle, then what did you want to do when you made Emingzu the Empress?" Li closed his eyes and said, "I've been talking to them for too long. I'm a little sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while." He was actually really sleepy, but the hands on his shoulders were getting stronger and stronger, making it hard for him to fall asleep. Tsang Province. Tsang Province was located at the northwest border of the Wu Kingdom. Although it was not considered a barren land, it was too far away from the imperial capital and bordered the fringe. From time to time, bandits would come out of the mountains to wreak havoc. For hundreds of years, the people of Tsang Province had been plagued by bandits. In the past 2 years, the bandits in the fringe had been eliminated, but the lives of the people had become even more difficult. Ever since the Wu Kingdom fell into chaos a few years ago, the imperial court had lost control of Tsang Province. In the past few years, Tsang Province had changed hands several times. First, a tyrant took advantage of the chaos in the country and attacked the provincial capital. He killed the provincial governor and his assistant officials and proclaimed himself king. Of course, they were annihilated by the imperial court a few months later. After that, Tsang Province was attacked by several other tyrant forces. The imperial court retreated and retreated. 2 years ago, Princess Duanrong used her iron fist to wipe out the rebellious forces in Tsang Province. She promulgated several policies to benefit the people, allowing the people of Tsang Province to have a short period of time to recuperate. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. Just a year ago, Princess Duanrong was besieged by the imperial court and several enlistment forces. After the defeat, there was no news of her. On the surface, Tsang Province had been reclaimed by the imperial court. However, with the imperial court's military strength, they were unable to suppress the rebellious forces that took advantage of the situation in the past year. The people suffered from the rebellious forces and their lives were extremely difficult. In a village several dozen miles away from Tsang Province's capital, a white-haired village chief was kneeling on the ground, tears streaming down his aged face. He pleaded, "Lord Steward, please give us a little more time. Please give us a few more days. 2 days ago, the village was robbed and we only have this little bit of food left. If you take this food away, we won't be able to survive." A middle-aged man dressed in a satin robe glanced at him and said coldly, "It's only right and proper to pay a debt. What does it have to do with me that you were robbed? I only know that if you can't pay the rent that you are supposed to pay, the master will punish me when I return." If I give you a little more time, who will give me a little more time? He looked at the people behind him and said, What are you waiting for? Take all the food away. The servants carried the sacks on their backs. Among the crowd below, more than 10 men dressed in coarse clothes had grief and indignation on their faces. However, they could only stand where they were, not daring to make any sudden movements. If they made a move on these people, the ones who would come knocking on their door tomorrow would be the constables of the government. Watching as the people carried the food onto the horse carriage, the middle-aged man looked down and frowned. You've only paid less than 30% of the rent. I'll give you half a month's time. If you still can't pay after half a month, don't blame me for being impolite. Half a month. The village chief watched as the people carried the last of the village's food away. He collapsed on the ground with lifeless eyes and muttered, Half a month, half a month. Half a month, everyone will starve to death. He sat on the ground and pointed at the sky as he cursed, damned heaven, you're not giving us a way out. You're sending us to our deaths. None of the villagers spoke. Their eyes were empty as they stared blankly in front of them. The autumn harvest had just ended, and all the food had been robbed by the bandits. Unable to pay the rent, the master had plundered all their food. There were nearly 100 mouths in this village, and they were about to run out of food. How could they survive until the next year? This King world doesn't give us a way out at all. How good would it be if Her Royal Highness was still here? Xiao Yun? The woman's panicked voice woke everyone up and they all looked in the direction of the voice. A 7 or 8-year-old girl with messy hair and ragged clothes was lying on the ground. The woman crouched on the ground and picked up the girl, shaking her in panic. Xiao Yun, what's wrong with you? The village chief crawled up from the ground and quickly walked over. He touched the girl's forehead and shook his head. This child has been sick for a few days. Hurry up and find a doctor. If we delay any longer, she'll die. The woman's face was filled with despair. They couldn't even eat, so where would they find the money to find a doctor? She hugged the girl and cried, Xiao Yun, I'm so sorry. Sister-in-law, what happened? The woman raised her head when she heard the voice beside her. She saw a young man walking over from the side of the road. The young man walked to the woman's side and crouched down. He pinched the little girl's philtrum and she slowly regained consciousness. She looked at the woman and weakly said, Mother, I'm hungry. The woman hurriedly wiped her tears and said, Mother will go find something for you to eat. The young man took out a package from his bosom. After opening it, he took out a steamed bun and handed it to the little girl. Eat something first. The little girl was startled. The next moment she took the steamed bun and wolfed it down. The young man turned back and said to the man with a Red Cross armband standing on the side of the road, This little girl is sick. Come and take a look at her. He looked at the woman and smiled. Don't worry, he's a doctor. All of this happened very quickly. The woman was stunned for a moment before she immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the young man a few times. She loudly said, Thank you for your great kindness, thank you for your great kindness. The young man shook his head and smiled. There's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress. Chapter 1078. The situation in Sangzhou had always been tense. Normally, when strangers passed by the village, if they stayed in the village for too long, they would be questioned. They had to be careful because there were too many precedents. If they were careless, it could lead to the destruction of the entire village. However, the people that appeared in the Dong family village today were not on guard. They were not people from the government, nor were they bandits that went down the mountain. Whether it was the government or bandits, they would not give the villagers free medical treatment, free medicine, or give their food to the villagers to eat. If these people were bad people, then they would want to meet bad people like them every day. The young man handed a few doses of medicine to the woman and said, Sister-in-law, this child only has a slight cold. Remember to boil 3 bowls of water into 1 bowl when you boil the medicine. You will be fine after drinking these medicines. We'll come back in 2 days. Thank you, benefactor, for saving our child. When the woman reached out to take the medicine, her eyes were filled with tears. She wanted to kneel down again, but the young man quickly helped her up. A man held his hand and firmly said, Benefactor's great kindness is something we cannot repay. As long as there is anything we can do, just say the word. I, Dong Dahai, will climb a mountain of swords or descend into a sea of flames without a frown. The young man smiled and shook his head. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to relieve the suffering of the common people. This is a good deed. If we ask for something in return, wouldn't it damage the Empress of Heaven's merit? The man was stunned and asked, "May I ask, benefactor, the Empress of Heaven that benefactor spoke of?" A trace of respect appeared on the young man's face. He said, "The Empress of Heaven is the embodiment of kindness and benevolence. We have received the teachings of the Empress of Heaven to punish the strong and eliminate evil, to help the people of the world, to eliminate injustice, and to accumulate good fortune for the Empress of Heaven. Many thanks to the Empress of Heaven, many thanks to the Empress of Heaven." After the man heard this, he pulled the woman beside him to kneel down and respectfully kowtowed several times in a certain direction. After they stood up, the young man looked at him and asked, "I heard that there is a group of fierce bandits nearby. They rape and pillage and do all kinds of evil. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to eliminate them. I wonder if you know where this one-eyed tiger bandit is now?" One-eyed tiger. When the man named Dong Dahai heard this name, he clenched his teeth and a look of hatred appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "A few days ago, it was them who rushed into the village and stole our food." The young man looked at him and asked, "So, you know where those people are?" "I know, of course I know." The man nodded, then shook his head. He looked at him and said anxiously, "Benefactor, you can't do this. One-eyed tiger has dozens of brothers under him, and each of them has extraordinary skills. Even the government can't do anything to them. If you go, you'll just be throwing your lives away." The young man didn't mind at all and said, "It's fine. You just need to tell me where the one-eyed tiger is." The man's expression changed for a while. A moment later, a trace of viciousness appeared in his eyes as he said, "Benefactor, you saved my family Xiao Yun's life. If we don't have food, our family will starve to death." His gaze gradually became resolute as he said, "If you're going to find the one-eyed tiger, please bring me along." "Me too. Count me in. I'm going to die either way. Even if I die to the mountain patrol tiger, it's better than starving to death. At least I can drag someone down with me before I die." More than 10 men rushed in from outside. They were all excited and stood behind Dong Dahai. There was not a single bit of food left in the village. After today, even if they were not killed by the bandits, they would slowly starve to death. Therefore, it was better to follow these people and fight for a chance of survival. In this world, one's life was determined by one's own effort. The young man looked at them and said, "Think about it carefully. If you go, there's a chance that you won't be able to return." The man standing in front of the group shook his head and said with a pitiful smile, "It's still better than starving to death." The village chief of the Dong family walked up to them unsteadily and said, "Even if Benefactor doesn't come, we'll still fight it out with them. Only by doing so will we have a chance of survival. If we don't, the whole village will die together." The young man pondered for a moment and did not refuse. He nodded and said, "Then let's go together." Over 10 strong young men of the Dong family took out hoes and shovels from their houses and carried them on their shoulders. Then they followed the young man out of the Dong family village and headed in a certain direction aggressively. Who was not afraid of death? In the past, they would not even have the thought of resisting those bandits. However, it was different now. If they did not resist, they would starve to death. They had been forced into a dead end. They only had 2 choices, resist or die. If they did not want to die, they could only resist. Fortunately, they had helpers. These benefactors did not seem to be ordinary people. There were over 10 of them. Together with them, the number of people they had was not far behind the one-eyed tiger. Dong family village. For the survival of the entire village, all the strong young men of the village had been mobilized to fight the most powerful bandits in the vicinity. They swore that they would take back their food. The old, the weak, the women, and the children had all stayed in the village. They stood at the entrance of the village and looked in a certain direction silently. A young child curled up in his mother's arms. He raised his head and asked, "Mom, where did Dad and the others go?" The woman lowered her head and said softly, "Dad and the others went to find food for us. Once they find food, we won't have to starve anymore." Rui City. Li looked down. Yang Luqing, Geezer Wang, Wei Liang, Qin Qin, and several deputies were all there. Even Mississippi Lu found a seat and sat at the back. He nodded, turned around, knocked on the blackboard and said, "Now let's start the class. Today we'll talk about the timing of a rebellion." He cleared his throat and continued, "The timing of a rebellion is very important. Think about it. Has anyone in the Jing Kingdom rebelled now? No one dares to rebel in the Jing Kingdom. What? Is it because the Jing Kingdom is strong and the people live and work in peace and contentment? Is it because they have nothing better to do?" Wei Liang nodded thoughtfully. Li Yi pointed at him and said, "General Wei, answer me. Why hasn't anyone in the Qi kingdom rebelled? Someone in the Qi kingdom rebelled. Wei Liang thought for a while and said, a few years ago the first prince of the Qi kingdom was bewitched by someone. He wanted to implement the silver of judgment law in the Qi kingdom. The country was in turmoil. The officials of several states rebelled. It involved many people. Later it was forcefully suppressed. Sit down. Li Yi glared at him and said, the example of the Qi kingdom's failed rebellion tells us that even a rebellion must be based on principles. When a country is still very strong, blindly rebelling will definitely pay a heavy price. The so-called timing of a rebellion is also the current situation. Several conditions must be met. The world is in chaos, the people have no way to make a living, the imperial court is not trustworthy, the rebels rise together. Obviously this is the current situation of the Wu kingdom. Later, Li Yi found that it was not easy to change their minds with just words on paper. Old Man Wang was an elite among scholars after all. But it was a bit difficult for generals like Wei Liang and Qin Qing to understand. However, they should understand these things the most. Therefore he could only return to his old business and set up a small Jiang of Silla class. He taught them for an hour every day. Judging from the effect of the lectures these days, the effect was not bad. He looked at the people below who had a look of realization on their faces and spoke again. Before a rebellion, you need to understand the main contradiction of a region. Is it the people and the government, the people and the gentry, or the people and the bandits? Only after you understand the main contradiction can you know what to do next. Only then can you gradually strengthen your troops. Sangzhou Dong Village. A group of old, weak women and children quietly waited at the entrance of the village until the sun was about to set. Suddenly a loud voice shouted, "They're back! They're back!" Everyone's spirits rose. When they looked up they saw a group of people walking over from afar. They saw their men and sons walking into the village in high spirits. Their faces were full of smiles, and each of them carried a big cloth bag on their shoulders. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.